Through the chair, the meeting is live.
Okay, great. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this special meeting of Finance and Corporate Services, where we will be dealing with our capital budget, which includes most of our one-time costs and projects, as well as we're looking at our financial position with respect to our reserves and that sort of thing. We will have some decision points to discuss, but not decide on this day as well, with respect to the additional $1 million we can put towards the strategic initiatives. And those three options are essentially affordable housing, adding additional parks and trails, or further addressing our infrastructure deficit. So with that in mind, I believe Mr. Lautenbach is kicking off the presentation. Good morning.
Good morning, Chair Davey, members of committee. Next slide, please. And one more. Today is Capital Budget Day, as indicated, and very similar to the operating budget discussions, we'll follow a similar format. I'll provide some opening remarks, and then we'll get into the detailed discussions for the remainder of the meeting. One other date I wanted to provide note related to is this week, tomorrow, we actually have the approval of water and gas utility rates. So that's something that Council will also be deciding on this week. And then final budget approval is slated for December 16th.
I'm terribly sorry to interrupt. I believe we're having some technical difficulties with the stream after all. Could I please bother you to pause for just one moment while I confirm that we're properly live?
Nope, no problem at all.
My sincere apologies for the interruption. My apologies for the delay. The meeting is now properly live. I do apologize.
Oh, please, no problem at all. Please continue, Mr. Lautenbach.
Okay, next slide, please. So as indicated during operating budget discussions, the 2022 budget is really made up of three main parts: the operating budget, which we talked about on November 15th, the capital budget, which we'll be talking about today, and then reserve funds, which we'll also cover, and Mr. Hagee has some slides related to that, and something that we look at each year as part of the budget process. Next slide, please. When we think about the capital budget, the majority of the budget itself is focused on asset replacement and rehabilitation needs. And how do we prioritize projects that are included in the capital forecast is based on asset management plans and condition assessments that are completed throughout the year, and various strategies that Council is aware of that we've brought forward in the past, such as the water infrastructure program, where we've made significant progress in addressing our underground and related assets. As well, facility infrastructure is something that has been a priority and something identified in recent years in terms of the gap that exists related to that asset. And we have made some progress in terms of addressing that gap, and will continue to be a focus as we move forward in the long term. There's also growth related projects that are included in the capital budget, and these are typically funded through development charges. And so what you see in the capital forecast is based on a development charge study that council approved back in 2019. We will be looking at the DC, an update to the DC study in early 2022, and that's as a result of legislative changes that has taken place since that time. And so capital costs associated with development projects will be updated as part of that process and then reflected in terms of what that new cost looks like in the 2023 budget and capital forecast. In addition, we also have a number of strategic items that we bring forward each and every year. For the most part, they focus on capital. And so we try to highlight those items, whether they are specific actions in the strategic plan or whether they're items that are aligned with the strategic plan. Next slide, please. And here are some examples in terms of this year's budget, in terms of some projects that are aligned with the strategic plan. There's 1.6 million that's earmarked for customer service enhancements at City Hall, which aligns with the theme of great customer service in our strategic plan. Council is aware of the 40-kilometer speed limit implementation, which is also reflected in this year's budget. We have 5.5 million that's addressing urban forest implementation over the 10-year timeframe within the capital forecast. 350,000 for Indigenous placemaking, and 3.6 million for downtown infrastructure improvements. And many of these items have issue papers that are included in the budget package with more detail for council, as well as some other items as well. Next slide, please. Very similar to a few years back, we have provided some options for council in terms of areas of potential investment. We've left 1 million in one-time capital funding unallocated, and this will allow for different choices to be made related to some suggested areas that staff have put forward for council to consider. And these are options that we're also engaging the public on as part of our public consultation process through the Engage survey. Next slide, please. And those options include the creation of an affordable housing reserve. This is one of the actions that were part of the Housing for All strategy that council supported. And the idea being that if a reserve was created, we would be looking to bring back a policy early in 2022 related to providing DC grants for affordable housing projects. And so you see with different levels of investment contemplated, whether that's to 250,000, $500,000 or $1 million, and a potential 50% DC grant, a certain number of units could be addressed through that type of policy. And so that's just for illustrative purposes, but the option is really focused on creating the reserve with the funds that would be available. Another option for council to consider is addressing the facility infrastructure gap. We certainly have some projects in the capital forecast that are already doing this, but this would be over and above that in terms of additional investment for this year. And the options contemplated as part of that is Lyle Hallman Pool upgrades for a $250,000 investment, comfort station upgrades across various facilities and parks as another option, and then LED lighting and paving at facility parking lots as a larger option. And then finally, the last consideration would be upgrading community trails. And you see the certain level of investment will allow for different meters of enhancements to trails to be accomplished if that was an option that council decided to put funding towards. Next slide, please. This is a graph that we've included in other budget presentations before, and it really just gives a snapshot of the capital program and sort of the main asset categories where you see investments. Obviously, the largest portion is the water infrastructure related assets, such as the full road reconstruction and water, sanitary, and stormwater that make up the largest part of the capital budget. But then other important assets such as our facilities and also things like parks, trails, and forestry as well. Next slide, please. And this graph just shows how the capital budget stacks up in terms of funding sources that support the various projects that you see in the forecast. The gray area is the largest piece, and again, that relates to utilities and enterprises in terms of the large investment that we've made in those areas and continue to make. The yellow part of the bar relates to grant funding that we received, and we've had significant funding provided in the past few years. Most of that would be related to the Disaster Mitigation Adaptation Fund funding that we received, which was close to 50 million. There's also funding that was received for the Aquatic Center as at Schlegel, which is another significant portion within that grant allocation. And then also the Canada Community Building Fund, which was formerly referred to as the Gas Tax Fund, is the dark blue piece of the graph. And that's funding that we receive each and every year, which has provided a reliable and sustainable source for municipalities and particularly for Kitchener. In 2021, the gas tax was doubled. And so that allowed us to bring more funding into 2022 to put to projects this year. And then the one other thing to note on this is you see it, the green section, which is the facility infrastructure, which is starting to grow over time. You recall that as part of the long-term financial plan, Council committed to assigning 40% of the EDIF debt room as part of that decision, which supported the facility, addressing the facility gap over that time. Next slide, please. And so really this year's budget is about moving forward again with the long-term investments in infrastructure. You'll recall that last year we had paused many of our capital projects, both out of concern at the time. We didn't know what operating funding we might be receiving, and so we had set aside some capital funds in case we needed to use those to cover operating deficits due to the pandemic. We didn't have to do that, and so we have that capacity back to invest in capital this year. We also have additional funding through the gas tax fund, as I mentioned, that we've applied. And so this year really looks like the normal sort of capital investments that we would make in a normal year, and certainly prioritizing moving ahead with resources available to deliver on those projects. The budget also includes alignment with strategic plan, as I mentioned, and provided some examples related to that. And that continues to guide what staff include within the capital forecast and budget. We often reference and look at the strategic plan to make sure that projects that are being included have that alignment. There's also the $1 million in one-time capital that's available to allocate to various suggested priorities for council to consider today, and I'm sure there'll be some discussion on that. And then finally, the grant funding that we have received over the past few years has been instrumental in terms of addressing many of our infrastructure-related needs, and certainly is leveraged wherever possible to do so. It is something that we continue to advocate for, something that we're always mindful of in terms of applications that we're submitting to help support the capital investments that are needed in our community. And so that ends my remarks, Chair Davey. I'd be happy to answer any questions if there are any. Otherwise, we can move on to the detailed discussions.
Thank you very much. So yeah, I would take questions now. I would just, I'd ask if any questions to be held for now on the three areas of spending. If anyone hasn't read further in the slide deck, there's an opportunity to discuss that a little bit later. So questions, Councillor Singh.
Thank you, Chair Davey. And just more of a high level question regarding, of course, as Mr. Lautenbach laid out, our strategy of moving forward with capital spending and infrastructure improvement. Like last year, we had to put things on hold due to the pandemic. And now this year and going to next, there's some extreme worries regarding inflation and inflated costs. Mr. Lautenbach, if not now, perhaps even later, if you can address that looming question, and if council should be approaching a strategy of some delay so that we can see how we wade through this sudden inflationary influx.
So certainly inflation is on an upward trend. It is something that we're monitoring in terms of the projects that we're proceeding with. We've adjusted where needed on projects to make sure that there's sufficient budget to proceed. Certainly the competitive process will help in terms of pricing. And so on larger infrastructure related projects, we have seen that many of those projects have come in under budget and still do so. And so it's something that we will have to monitor just to see how the materials that are included in those types of projects are impacted over time. But we would still recommend moving ahead. I don't think we're being too aggressive with what we're proposing in terms of the budget itself, but very looking at a typical sort of normal investment that we would see, and something that we think is still important to move ahead with.
So just very quickly as a clarity, and I'm not necessarily saying we should slash our capital budget, but more so in case we can put in savings and delay some. If you tell me that staff are already approaching that cautious approach, then I don't think council needs to, dwell into the weeds. But again, if we're approaching as no different than, what we would do otherwise, I think we do have to address that inflation issue. Again, I'm not saying we should cut a budget. I think it should be kept in reserve in time when inflation becomes easier to manage with, and then we have that extra monies to expand that capital improvement projects at accelerated pace. So again, if you're telling me staff already apply that caution, then I'm okay with it. If we're not necessarily putting key specific considerations to it, then I think council needs to have a wider discussion as part of this budget. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Lotbach, do you want to follow up, or?
So I would say we are cautious in terms of looking at each project and making and making sure that before we proceed that we have sufficient budget to do so, and monitoring obviously the situation of inflation and how it impacts projects. So I think it does align with what you were asking, Councillor Singh. Certainly what we proposed in this year's budget. We've made adjustments where needed, and I think we'll continue to monitor as we go ahead. And then we still have the option in terms of looking at timing of those projects in terms of the procurement process. And so that's something that kind of goes hand in hand with the budget approval, but still provides us with some flexibility.
Yeah, it's a good point to touch on, Councillor Singh, and I guess although staff can only do so much in terms of their anticipation, I guess we have the hammer at the end in terms of seeing the tenders, right? So anyway, do not see any other questions. I believe we're transferring to Mr. Haggie. Just a heads up to members of committee that because the boards for both the Center and the Square and the library are essentially status quo, there are no staff to answer any questions, but I'm sure Mr. Haggie will do his best. Mr. Haggie.
Yep. Thank you, Mr. Chair. Glad to be joining you. It's true that the boards are watching. They're not in attendance to answer questions. We believe because the request this year is very straightforward, in line with what they've done before, that there's likely no need for them to attend. Next slide, please. So as far as Center and the Square goes, their budget ask is similar, 6.5 million over the 10-year forecast. This year, we're asking for close to $600,000. Next slide. Just a bit of an update on what has already been achieved or is in the works. There's washroom renovation, which is a significant renovation at the Center and the Square that's being done starting in 21, carrying over to 2022. That is funded through a grant, the Community Culture and Recreation funding that they were successful in getting funding for. So quite glad that could move forward, improve accessibility and just the overall amenity at the center. They've already achieved some projects as far as replacing doors. There's the elevator upgrade undergoing right now. And so Center and the Square is very happy with kind of where things are heading, what has already been accomplished in this year's capital budget. Next slide. As far as the library or KPL, they've, again, their 10-year ask is in line with what has previously been included in the forecast, a total of $6.5 million, with about $500,000 in 2022. The only change essentially from last year is a new item being added toward the back end of the forecast for their integrated library system. And it's just a change in that system, going from something that they would purchase and replace kind of every 10 years. A lot of software and those types of things are going with the software as a service format. And so that's what they're projecting will happen when their current system kind of is at the end of its useful life, that they'll be moving to a software as a system piece. And so there's been funding that's been added in for that in 2028 and future years in the forecast. Next slide, please. So that ends the board section. I will pause just in case there are any questions or comments. We may be able to answer. If not, perhaps representatives from those boards may be able to answer, or we could always follow up with the Center and the Square and KPL.
Very good. Two members of the committee with questions. First, Councillor Marsh.
Thank you, Chair Davy. So I'm just curious about the surplus that was projected in the operating dollars for the center and the square, 167,000 plus, and I'm just wondering, where is that represented in the capital improvement, the capital replacement fund?
Through the chair, it's if they were to achieve that at the end of the year, it would go to the center and the square's capital budget or to their capital reserve, and they would be able to invest that. We're only showing the city side of things, so the funding that we provide to them for capital, but they have some of the costs at center and the square are funded fully by center and the square. Some of them are funded fully by the city, and other things are cost split. So essentially, if they have a surplus, they would keep it and be able to invest it for their capital program or their side of the capital program. So
Okay.
it is not shown anywhere specifically in our capital forecast, because in essence, at the end of that, it becomes their money and they can choose how to invest it.
Right, it's their money, and that's fair. But the money that we give to them every year is represented in our budget, but then the money that they make isn't that reflected in their budget, or is that just for their board to see and not for us to see?
So I believe council gets the full integrated financial statements from them, but what we are currently showing here in the capital forecast is the capital funding the city is going to invest in the center and the square. It does not include the money that center and the square is raising through their CRF, the surcharge on tickets, all that sort of stuff. That is not shown anywhere in our budget.
Okay, great, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ioannidis.
Thanks, Chair Davy. Are we just talking about the boards here, or is what's on the screen capital funding sources in general? Is that
Just boards right now, just KPL and center and the square.
okay? Are we looking for any motions to approve?
I don't, we wouldn't take a motion to approve until the end for
Okay.
all, I believe. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay.
All right. Thanks.
Thank you. I'm not seeing other questions. Mr. Hagee, please continue.
So the next section we'll cover is capital funding sources. Next slide, please. In Mr. Lautenbach's overview, he already showed some of this information kind of portrayed differently. This just shows out of the entire 10-year capital budget, where does the money come from? As you can see, more than half of the funding comes from enterprises. The largest chunk of that is our water utilities, as well as the gas utility. So water, sanitary, storm, and natural gas. Those are expensive programs to run. A lot of the pipes are down underground, require digging, which costs a lot. So the majority of the costs in our capital forecast come from enterprises. Kind of moving over to the next section, capital pool. That's funding that comes from taxes, from issuing debt, from the gas utility investment reserve and the hydro investment utility reserve. We'll talk about those in a bit more detail in a few slides. It makes up about 13%. Development charges, another large chunk coming in at 14% towards growth-related infrastructure. And then smaller portions for reserves, the CCV fund, again, formerly known as Fed Gas. And if you slip up and say that, totally fine. We do that quite often. It's a brand new thing. Grants coming in at around 4%. Mr. Lautenbach already focused on that a little this morning, as well as the facilities reserve coming at 2%. You can go ahead 2 slides, please. Looking at the 10-year capital funding sources for 2022, again, that's 2022, the entire budget, not just the single year, 2021, and comparing them, you can see overall there's been an increase of about $60 million over the entire 10-year forecast. Just like to remind council, and there's already been some discussion about it this morning, the 2021 budget, we paused on a lot of things. So instead of inflating things instead of adding things into the capital forecast. We essentially held the line, just paused spending in especially the early years of the capital forecast, but as well that had a trickle effect all the way across the capital forecast. And so where you see some of the areas going up, a lot of that has to do with the forecast last year was not a typical 10-year forecast. It was more like a 1-year special 1-year reduced amount, and then the trickle effect of that going out over the other 9 years. So you see the capital pool increasing, enterprise funding increasing, reserve funding increasing, a lot of those going up. That's kind of a high level explanation of all of those. You'll see development charges has gone down by about $23.5 million. Two main reasons for that. One is, again, in 2021, there were a lot of projects that were funded by the DCs that have now been either started or completed or not in the capital forecast. And there were not new things that have come in the back end of the forecast to fill that back up. And part two is that our DCs went down because of one of the grants we received for the Schlegel Park Aquatic Center. That's about $17 million. So that funding is not required out of development charges. It will show up on the grant line. You'll see that those numbers are not perfectly aligned though, because some of the grant line actually went down somewhat because of DMAF funding coming off. So we had $11 million of DMAF funding that was in 2021 that is no longer in the capital forecast. So minus 11 million and then plus $17 million of grants for the aquatic center, kind of offsetting that. Overall, we see that kind of increase of about $60 million over the entire 10-year capital forecast. Next slide, please. We'll touch briefly on the capital pool. I've already mentioned the four funding sources: capital out of current, or a direct transfer from the operating budget to the capital budget, issuing debt, and then transfers from the two hydro reserves. And next slide, please. We'll just look at those in a little detail. So the debt line is the top line. Overall, if you go to the very right-hand side, you can see that there's about $38 million of funding over the 10 years coming from issuing debt. The capital out of current line is in line with that, about $33 million over the 10 years. Next are the two utility reserves, or we've got the gas utility reserve funding about $72 million of the capital program, and the hydro reserve funding $43 million. So in total, we've allocated $188 million over 10 years from the capital pool, as we would recall this. That perfectly aligns with the department request. So essentially all of the things in the capital pool can be funded by the sources listed on the screen. So we are actually able to fund everything. Some other municipalities sometimes put things in their capital forecast that they have intention to do, but they don't have any way to fund. That is not our practice. And the slide shows on the tax supported side where all the funds are coming from. Next slide, please. I believe this is the last slide in this section. Just a reminder for council, if there are adjustments made to the capital budget, there are consequences of it. It could either require removing something from a capital budget, a different capital project, making a change in a reserve contribution, increasing taxes to pay for it, or increasing debt. So depending on what adjustment is made, again, we're not suggesting that any of that needs to be done through the budget that's proposed. It's fully funded, everything is balanced. But if there are adjustments that be requested by council or approved by council on final budget day, there would be an impact to some other area. Next slide, please, I believe. That's the end of that section. So before we talk to debt, I'll just pause and see if there are any questions.
Any questions from committee? Councillor Ioannidis?
Thanks, Chair Davey. I guess my question is with regards to the additional $1 million. Where was it? How did that get allocated from?
So it's funding from the tax capital reserve, which we'll get to. I believe it's in two sections. So there have been capital closeouts that were made that funding has not been fully allocated to other projects. As you will recall, last year through the capital process, we were very tentative about the financial future, not understanding exactly where things were going. So a lot of that money was not reinvested or required for other things. So there's about $1 million that's available that could be funded or could fund other priorities. And there are the issue papers that we'll talk about in a little while.
Yep. Great, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Singh.
It just quickly, Councillor Reinhardt has touched on this regarding the $1 million, where that came from. And the other is of any tweaks that we make would obviously on this slide, page 36 shows the ripple effect, what the consequence would be, either increase to a tax or on debt. My question is regarding the $1 million. If we want to choose to focus on, just as an example, I know this is a later discussion, say affordable housing, rather than using that available $1 million that's coming from capital, could we not consider as a debt issuance with a strategy applied of a payback, full payback in that at the end of that 10-year, which would allow us to do both focus on the affordable housing consideration as well as some of the other items that are part of the issue papers as well. I'm just trying to look for ways to maximize on both. Million's not a lot in the grand scheme of things when you look at a citywide perspective, and both the parks and trails and the affordable housing, I think they compete, but they're both equally important as well.
So through the chair, out of the options that's available, I would say issuing debt for affordable housing, depending on what is being done, would probably not be allowed. We're only allowed we can issue debt when we're creating a physical asset. So unless we're building or acquiring affordable housing, we would not be able to do it. There's also the impact going forward of it would be, we need no money today. If we were to issue debt for any of those options, we need no money today, but we need money next year to start making the debt payments. So that would be an operating budget impact, as opposed to we currently have that money in reserve right now and could use the money to make an investment today.
Well, that helps clarify, Mr. Chair. I may have some ideas later that we could address that, and I'll ask through an issue paper, but I'll leave that for afterwards. Thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Verbenovich.
Thanks, Chair Davey, and Councillor Singh has partially gone down the path with a question that I wanted to ask as well, in terms of how we might be able to add additional dollars potentially for affordable housing initiatives. I understand the point around, that we would have to consider it from an operating point of view down the road if we went the debt route. And there are some complications. In light of Kitchener's ties with groups like Kitchener Housing, does that give us the ability to potentially use dollars to acquire, an asset that would potentially be managed by them?
Through the chair, I'd have to check in with the region specifically. I believe it's essentially when we're issuing debt, it needs to be for an asset the city owns that is a legitimate physical asset used for city services, and the term of the debt could not exceed the length of the useful life of the asset. So again, depending on what's being proposed, so for instance, we would not be able to issue debt to give a grant to Kitchener Housing, but
we could potentially, if I'm hearing you correctly, own an asset that they would manage on our behalf?
Yes, I believe so. Like, for instance, we would be able to issue debt for the Center in the Square, which is essentially, it's a city facility, it's a city asset, it's ours, but they essentially operate it functionally.
Okay. I want to give that some more thought as well. Thank you.
Okay, I just have one question going back to the debenture issuing slide from the capital pool. I noticed that it looks like the amount at is, more than, I don't know, double the next few years. How much does that fluctuate? I don't remember what the amount was last year, and like, why is it higher than it is so much than 2023, 2024?
Sure. So through the chair, that amount can vary depending on the rate that is coming off. So essentially, we would, as debt comes off, we would issue so that we don't have a dramatic impact on our overall tax rate. So if our debt servicing costs is say $500,000, but we were issuing at 8% and now it's at 2%, we can issue a lot more debt than we could when it was at 8%. So as that debt comes off, we will look at what the amount is and issue essentially as much debt as we can to keep our debt service costs in line. So since rates are low right now, we're able to issue more. We just use a standard, I believe it's 5% kind of across the board, assuming that that's what the rate will be at that point in the future. We will update that every single year, but we typically will only look at the first year or two. We have more certainty on the interest rates in that time frame than we do 5, 6, 7 years out.
Okay, thank you for that. There are no further questions. Please continue.
Right. So the next section we will consider is, I see Councillor Singh's.
Oh, apologies, Councillor Singh.
No, I'm just trying to get in line. I'm sorry, Dave.
Please go ahead.
The next section we will cover is debt. Next slide. Again, debt is similar to getting a mortgage or buying a house. As I've mentioned before, the debt that the city issues is essentially a fixed closed mortgage. So it is, once we issue it, we have no prepayment options or benefits or any of that sort of thing. It's a fixed contract essentially. So if we issue for 10 years and we get a debt schedule, we will pay that off over those 10 years according to the debt schedule with no options to break or open it up. As we'll see, and as council's seen the last number of years overall, our debt levels are essentially decreasing, and the graphs over the next few slides should be fairly similar to council, similar to other ones council has seen in previous years. Next slide, please. First is the total debt outstanding graph. We can see that the debt was at its peak back in 2013. That was the final year of original EDIF. The green bars at the top represent the EDIF debt. The red bars in the middle are enterprises or recoverable debt that is not from tax purpose. And then the tax debt at the bottom is the debt we were talking about in the capital pool. There's also some blue bars coming off in 2022 and future years, and that's EDIF 2.0 debt. So council has made the decision in previous discussion to take some of the debt that is coming off from EDIF and reinvest that in EDIF 2.0. So they issue debt for that. It's 40% of the costs of the EDIF debt coming off are being reinvested into EDIF 2.0. So overall, you can see essentially a bit of a downward slope from 2013 down to our current time frame, and then a more gentle slope kind of from 2022 out to the right, stabilizing kind of in the ballpark of $45–50 million going out to 2031. Next slide, please. This graph just shows the debt charges as a percent of a tax levy. The lines, dotted lines kind of in the middle show a range of 5 to 10%, which is the target area for credit rating agencies. You can see for 2022, we're well within those bounds and plan to stay there for the next 5 or 6 years, and then actually moving down into the lower end of that, which is good news for us, essentially meaning that our debt charges are relatively low compared to where the target range is. Next slide, please. Again, another measure just to see where we are for debt per household. So the average homeowner in the city, kind of how we fare. The moderate range shown by the dotted lines, again, is $400 to $1,000. And as council has seen before, we're well within that range, in the middle of the moderate range and trending towards low, going out to the right. Next slide, please. Debt to reserve is another ratio we look at every year. The target area is 1-to-1, which would mean that we would have $1 in reserve for every dollar we have in debt. The fact that we're below that right now means we actually have more money in reserve than we do in debt. As we talked about, the debt levels are kind of plateauing and staying relatively even. So the upward tick you see going out to 24, 25, 26 essentially tells us that our reserve levels are going to decrease over the next few years a little bit, but we're still going to be at that target level of 1-to-1 if the forecast holds true. Next slide, please. Just some final thoughts on debt. So again, we talked that our debt load was peaked in 2013. We see the debt level coming down. Our debt to reserve ratio is below target. Good news. All of these indicators are essentially, good financial news for us, meaning that our debt levels are, within reason or within the target ranges. So on the debt side of things are looking relatively good for the city. I'll pause there, Mr. Chair, and take questions.
Thank you, Councillor Singh.
Yeah, just with the last comments of Mr. Hagee, I think he's being too humble. I think we've done exceptionally well when it comes to our debt. Over the last 10 years, we've gone from anywhere between 100 and close to 120 million now to in the range of around 60 million. We've slashed our debt in half over the last 10 years. And that's easy enough to do if you don't spend. But the City of Kitchener has both strategically spent in our infrastructure and capital investments towards our economy as well. So we've been able to achieve both improvement of our community and reducing debt. So speaking to some of the earlier questions that were asked by myself and Mayor Vivenovic regarding debt as a strategy still, one slide that we typically don't show, I think it in future it would be helpful, especially for this year, I think, outlining what the current interest rates are in the debt markets, as well as some past trends. And perhaps if we have the data, what the future projection is as well. That may be, if that information is available, helpful just even later on this afternoon for discussion, because we may have some ideas put forward.
Thank you. I think staff will note that. I just have one question on the debt charges as a percent of tax levy slide. I'm assuming that has a built-in assumption of tax increases going forward out to that 2031 timeframe.
Yes, it would.
So is it just like a 2%, like a plug-in number? Do you know offhand what that is?
It would be a constant. I'm honestly not positive what we used. I imagine it's 2% or less, like 1.5 or 2%, but I don't actually recall.
Okay, thanks. It's just a point of curiosity. Yeah, and I would also echo Councillor Singh. I said this in previous budget meetings that some of these slides are my favorite ones and ones that this council should be very proud of in terms of our debt management. We're granted, of course, we were helped tremendously by the provincial and federal levels of government through COVID and making sure that these figures didn't get worse. But well before that, even if you cut off at 2020, we are the one level of government where debt is declining and we're increasing our capacity to be able to respond. So always happy to see this. No other questions? Please continue, Mr. Hagee.
Sure. So the next section we'll get into is reserves. Next, please. Again, or just a reminder to council that reserves are essentially like our savings accounts or our RSPs. Overall, our reserve balance are generally positive. We've got minimum funding targets, and we'll talk about them in a bit more detail over the next few slides. Next, please. We do have a reserve policy that's been in place for about a decade. Essentially, we have separate reserve funds with specific purposes, principles that reserve balances should not get negative, their target levels, and we group them into 5 different categories. Next slide, please. The slide just shows those 5, and we'll go through them over the next few slides: corporate, development, program specific, stabilization, and capital. Next, please. There are target indicators in each area. So black means extremely good or that the reserve is over its maximum. Green means that it's between the minimum and maximums. Yellow, it's below minimum, but it's positive. And red are the ones that we don't want to see. That's where there's a zero balance or a negative balance in the reserve. Next, please. Starting with corporate reserves, I'll generally be focusing in the 2022 budget column and then talking just at the total level, comparing between our 21 projection, 22 budget. So here you can see that the 21 projection is almost $7 million, going down to 5.8 million in 2022. The major change there is in WSIB, that it's dropping off from 1.8 million to $450,000. We'll take stock of that when we come to year end to see if the projection for that holds true. Right now, that's our best estimate as to where things would be. But again, it's something we've been keeping our eyes on over the last few budget cycles, and we are doing all we can to ward off any issues with the WSIB reserve. It should be on council's radar, but it's definitely not an emergency state yet. Next slide, please. Each of the areas will also have a graph like this that shows green line maximum balance, maximum target balance, red line the minimum target balance, and the stack or the bar graph showing where they sit compared to those. Corporate reserve funds are well below their minimum balances, and generally kind of treading water, heading down over the next few years. Next slide, please. On the development side of things, we've just got our DC reserve. It's above its maximum balance of $5 million in the short term. As the graph shows on the bottom end of things, that quickly turns from a positive to a negative. We have some significant capital programs or projects that would come through the DC reserve. We're going to be talking, I believe, in the next section about DCs, so we can have a bit more detailed discussion there. The short version is this may not actually come into fruition. We're looking at our DC bylaw right now, and we'll be looking at kind of the capital program and the potential rates that could be put in place. And so, well, this is a snapshot of where DCs are looking right now. This will change through the update to the DC bylaw, which is coming to council in 2022. Next slide, please. Program specific reserves, we see actually increase in the balance in 2021 to 2022. The major activity is kind of in the 3E reserves toward the top of the slide. Economic development, that reserve pre-existed the Make It Kitchener 2.0 plan, and that balance is being drawn down. We see the EDIF 2.0 reserve going up because of the potential for proposed land sale or projected land sale that could close in 2022. And then the election reserve is being drawn down as the election is happening in 2022. Next slide, please. Then we see significant balances in the program specific areas for 2022, 2023, but then as essentially the EDIF 2.0 program kicks into full gear, we see that those balances are dropping off and could potentially become negative in 25, 26. Again, it all depends on the timing of the EDIF 2.0 programming as far as when expenses come out and when land sales actually happen, which at this point are uncertain as far as the time. Next slide, please. Stabilization reserves are the next that we'll consider. There's a lot of change in these reserves. We see the overall balance in 2021, projected balance of 47 million, going down to 38, almost 39 million. As we talked about during operating budget, a lot of the enterprises have projected deficits or adjustments. You can see that at the very top, starting with building. There's a planned reduction in that reserve. On the gas side for delivery and supply, even though there's a significant rate increase, it's still drawing down the reserve as the cost of gas is going up. You see the golf reserve going from a negative balance of $1 million to negative 1.5. Parking coming down by almost $1 million. These are all significant decreases in those areas, as well as some of the other ones. I'll just draw your attention in the investment stabilization toward the bottom of the slide. That we're projecting that balance will be drawn down significantly as interest rates still have not come back up. So we're looking at that reserve to take on or take the brunt of what we anticipate would be a projected deficit in that reserve or in that function of our investment income in 2022. Again, that depends on where interest rates go and the products we're able to purchase in 2022. Hoping this doesn't come to fruition, but it's realistic based on where the interest rates have been. Next slide, please. Overall, stabilization reserves are at a high level or at their minimum balance in 2022, projected to essentially flutter around the minimum balance going forward. So in aggregate, that's true, but as we just saw on the previous slide, there's some areas that have extensive reserves, like building, others that don't. We saw golf had a negative balance, and never the twain shall meet. We can't take the surplus we have in the building reserve and use that to fund the golf reserve. So while overall, the stabilization reserves are looking good, there are definitely areas of concern, specifically golf and to a lesser extent parking. Next slide, please. Should be capital. There we go. Go back up one, please. On the capital reserve, when it shows, we've got the capital reserves for each of the enterprises as well as tax. So earlier the question was, where's the $1 million coming from? It's on this line. You see the tax capital reserve about 2/3 of the way down the screen. The projected balance at the end of 2022 is about $2 million or 2.1. There is a draw coming out in 2023, which is why that $2 million balance is not fully available. It's only $1 million because there's things that are happening are currently in budget in 2023 that would be funded from that reserve in 2023. Overall, we've got balances here. You can see that the water utilities toward the middle, you see sanitary is being drawn down to fund their capital program and whatnot. So overall, there's some significant balances in some of those, but the especially sanitary, storm, and water reserves are being drawn down over the next few years to fund their capital program. Next slide, please. Capital is split into two sections. That section is so big, so this is just the remainder of the capital funding balance. You see overall, there's a number of these capital reserves that have sizable or healthy balances, but overall, the total capital reserves are being drawn down from 64 million to 55 million in 2022. Next slide, I believe is the summary. The target levels. So overall, the target level are being met in 2022 and then kind of being drawn down between 2023 and 2026. Still positive, but below the target levels. Next slide, please. So overall, reserve balances are projected to be above the minimum balance in total, but as we've seen and talked about, some healthy balances in individual reserves kind of cover up some of the problem areas that we have discussed. There is a more detailed budget schedule or reserve schedule in the issue paper that follows these 4 slides in the budget package. I'll pause there, Mr. Chair, if there are any questions about the reserve section.
There are, Councillor Marsh.
Yeah, thanks. I was wondering if staff could follow up by email just to remind us what can be spent in the energy retrofit fund. And yeah, I don't remember the most recent update that we've had on how we're spending that and again, what qualifies.
Yeah, we'll note that as a email follow-up.
Thanks.
Very good. Not seeing anyone else, just a couple quick questions. So looking at the stabilization reserve fund balances, yeah, your point's well taken, Mr. Haggie, and I'm wondering if maybe just some feedback from the future. Like, for example, the building enterprise stabilization reserve really means nothing because we can't transfer out of it. All it really means is how it affects the rates for building permits and such. But we can, and correct me if I'm wrong, but we can in theory, transfer from, say, the parking enterprise, we shouldn't, but we can transfer from the parking stabilization to golf, right? That's within council's purview to do. So it might be useful to sort of break out, because I think this paints a bit of a rosier picture in my mind of the total reserve balances versus what we can actually use to address some of the problems. So could you do, like, am I correct in that assumption?
Yeah, through you, Mr. Chair. Yes, in theory, that's possible. You would be going against your own policy, but you're not going against legislation, which is a much more serious thing.
Right. Okay. So, and those things again, like water, stormwater, you can't touch those. Gas utility, we again, actually, gas utility. Are we legislated not to transfer it from there? We probably should be.
See, Mr. Chapman is putting his hand up.
Okay. Oh, there, Mr. Chapman.
Through Mr. Chair, so you're correct. In some cases, there's very clear legislation. The building enterprise is a good example of that. In the case of gas and golf, it's a bit more nuanced. So in the case of golf, we entered into a level playing field agreement as a part of an OMB settlement in the Dune Golf expansion years ago, that basically the city committed not to cross subsidize into the golf operation to ensure that we remain competitive with the private sector. And so simply propping up the stabilization reserve or the golf operation through the tax base would be offside that settlement and that level playing field agreement. In the case of utilities, it's the same principle that we're not rate regulated by the OEB, but that's on the understanding that, again, there is no hidden subsidy to or from the gas utility. And so again, we have a dividend policy that we followed, but we need to be very careful, especially on the supply side, that we are not creating a subsidy.
I muted myself somehow. Two more quick questions, if I could. Or actually, sorry, just one more. The one reserve that sort of jumped out at me in this is the WSIB reserve. That there's a huge drawdown, it looks like, and I guess I'm looking for staff to tell me why I shouldn't be concerned about this going forward.
Sure. So through the chair, we've got, as part of our year-end process, we look at things that are in the WSIB reserve, if they are legitimate to be there or if they should be somewhere else. And we've modeled based on some historic practice or what we're currently seeing. So the projection for 2022, I would say, is not as informed as it will be come year end. And we'll be looking at that in a lot more detail. We now are staffed more appropriately. I have somebody who can look at it on a more regular basis, get us better information that we didn't have previously. And so 2022, yes, there does look like a drop. I'm just not sure if that's exactly how things are going to play out or what have you. So it may be something that comes forward to council as part of next year's budget, but for now, I would say it's not the issue that it may appear to be.
Thank you. A couple people back in the queue. Councillor Singh.
Yeah, this may be a little bit of scope of the capital discussion, but it would impact our overall reserves for the building enterprise. It sits in a healthy reserve, and I had brought this up as part of I think when we initially looked at operating, and there's an issue paper, I think it's coming back as well. Linking, of course, our efforts to subsidize or support affordable housing in Kitchener and the building of additional units. Can we direct our building division to either subsidize the building fees or through incentivizing? And what would that mean to the stabilization reserve? I don't know if a high level answer can be given to that.
So through the chair, I'll respond. We've got essentially the Building Act would not allow that. It says the Building Code Act says building has to get paid for the permits that it has. So we could not use building to do that. If we were to provide some kind of waiver or subsidy or any of that sort of stuff, it would have to be funded by taxes, not the building reserve, or not the building enterprise.
That's unfortunate. Thank you.
It is.
Councillor Marsh.
Thanks. Yeah, when we get a little update about what is spent in the other reserve, I'm just wondering if we could understand a bit better, or perhaps staff can answer now, what is weather events reserve meant for? Like we did have, for example, an ice storm a few years ago, and so many trees lost their branches or were lost altogether. And I'm just wondering if additional tree planting, for example, would qualify for spending in that out of that reserve.
Through the chair, that reserve was originally called the, I think, winter weather reserve. It has been updated recently to be weather events. So it had focused simply on poor weather and in the winter. Now it's much more broad to include if we were to have a summer storm or what have you. Essentially, we have certain cost centers that within the operations or parks and cemeteries area that would, if we collect costs there related to specific weather events that are unusual and extreme, those costs would be covered from that reserve. I would suggest just typical additional tree planting, it would not fit the bill for the kind of parameters of what that reserve is for. It's really extreme situations that are unplanned as opposed to a planned planting program.
Okay, maybe I'll follow up later. I'm not suggesting that we just say, oh, well, let's plant some more trees and plant it. I'm saying let's respond to lost trees due to weather events. But yeah, we can take that conversation further. Thanks.
Thank you, Mr. Haggie. DCs.
All right, yes. Development charges is the next section. There we go. And as council's aware, DCs are fees that are charged for development costs to fund growth-related capital costs. It says here, those are typically paid at building permit stage. As council probably recalls, there were some changes to legislation that changed the timing of when those are paid for certain types of properties. But still, generally, most people are paying DCs at building permit. Principle is supposed to be growth pays for growth, so that the existing taxpayers are not paying for new facilities that benefit that are required because we have additional growth within the city. Next slide, please. The DC Act sets out kind of the rules and regulations that we have to follow. As I've mentioned, there were amendments made. So through Bill 108, Bill 138, Bill 197, a whole whack of things were updated or changed. So it brought in freezing DC rates for up to 2 years on as people go through a planning process. Their payment deferrals for 5 years or 10 years, depending on the type of property. For some developments, not all of them, but some of them. Has been a 10% reduction for soft service things, so things that we're not engineering. For instance, if we were building a community center, we would have to fund 10% of that through taxes as opposed to 100% of it being able to be funded through DCs. That is being removed. And also introduce something new called the community benefit charge. So those are changes in the Act. Over the next little bit, next few slides, I'll talk a bit about each of those and kind of what our plan is. Next slide. So we are in the process of updating our DC bylaw and looking at CBCs as well as to whether it makes sense for us as a municipality to have them. If we were, what would they be like? So we've already retained Hempson, who has done our last few DC studies to help us out with that. And we're planning on coming back to council in 2022 with the proposed DC study, DC rates, and then having those approved and come effective likely July 1st of 2022. By doing this, we'll make sure that we comply with the new DC Act and legislation. It also allows us an opportunity to revisit some things like project timing, project costing. As we looked earlier, the DC reserve going into a negative balance. The council will have an opportunity to discuss if that's something that we want to consider or not. If not, it would mean deferring off some capital projects the development community may want to move forward with. So those are discussions that we intend on having with council in the spring of 2020. Next slide, please. As far as the DC projection goes, we have a surplus balance. It's not quite as good as what was planned. Revenues are up, but as council may recall, throughout 2021, there were a couple things that came forward. Council caught some projects that were underway that were over budget need additional funding. So our transfers to capital projects from the DC reserves were up in 2021 compared to what we thought. Next slide. This just summarizes the DC projection. Again, 2021 forecast, you can see we're essentially at a $6 million positive balance compared to 8.8 million projected balance. We see it staying positive for 2022, 2023, and then turning negative and actually having some very large negative balances potentially in 25 and future years, as there's some significant capital projects that are projected in that time frame that would draw down the balance into negative. But as I mentioned before, council will have an opportunity to discuss and approve whether that actually happens as we update our DC bylaw. Next slide, please. All right, I'll pause for if there are any questions on DCs.
There's one, Councillor Singh.
Regarding the upcoming DC bylaw, remind me again, Ryan, do we have the ability to have our DC bylaws incorporate subsidization of any deferrals for DCs towards some affordable housing? So it's built within the bylaw as opposed to having to cover that cost through the tax base.
Through the chair, the DC bylaw doesn't look at what you're building or for what purpose you're building it. It looks at what form it is and says if it's this form. So if it's an apartment, it should be the charge should be $10,000.
No, I understand that, but again, my understanding is not with full clarity, so that's why I was looking for a little bit more guidance and understanding better. I thought that the DC bylaws legislatively were recently amended to include some soft costs as well, apart from just hard costs of community improvements or development. So could affordable housing be a part of that?
So the recent changes have said that for affordable housing that they can defer their payments until occupancy, their first payment until occupancy, and then they can defer the payments for an additional 20 years. That's part of the legislation that got passed as part of the Bill 108, 138, 197 path.
Thank you. So that's what I was referring to, but the interest that would have to be incurred as well. Could we build that interest within the DC reserve?
So we are not charging interest to those properties. Council passed a policy saying that those would not be charged. And so there's no interest to be added into the DC reserve for that.
One more question. A part of that Bill 108 or Bill 109 also addresses rental unit subsidization or incentivizing building of rental units. Does that allow the deferral of DCs for rental housing development?
It's so there's the rate freeze part, which applies. So I imagine a number of affordable housing ones would qualify for that through the planning process. So their DC rate gets frozen at that point, and then again they would anything that is affordable housing can defer payments for 20 years. The other qualifying properties can only defer for 5 years. So affordable housing already has the most beneficial deferred payment plan out of any type
rental housing can have a deferral as well.
Sorry, I'm having a little hard time.
I'm sorry, purpose-built rentals.
Sorry, what was the question, Councillor Singh?
Sorry, the speaker is not working well. Now, purpose-built rentals, Councillor Davey. Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Yeah, sorry, you said purpose-built rentals. Sorry, what was the question though?
No, can that be deferred for the 5-year period?
I believe that those types of, I think it's multi-res that's available to be deferred for 5 years.
Okay, all right, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, thank you. I was just wondering, you made reference to some big projects that were going to be funded through the DC charges and hence the deficits in 2025 and onward. What are those projects? And you may have already said this. If you haven't, I apologize.
No, I didn't mention any of them specifically. A few that come to mind. There's some significant recreation facilities that are coming online down towards Schlegel Park. So future phases of Schlegel Park is one of it. The aquatic center is, well, a lot of it is funded by by a grant. A portion of it is not. There's an indoor turf facility that is being built in that side of town as well. So there's some large recreational type things that are happening, as well as some major rehabs to parks and trails and what have you. And then on the engineering capital structure or capital infrastructure, I forget the specific ones, but there's some roadways and sanitary sewers and water pipes that need to be built to service land primarily in the southwest part of Kitchener.
And new parks, would they fall under development charges?
They do. So the new neighborhood parks definitely fall within there, as well as we've funded rehabilitation of some of our larger parks. So Victoria, McLennan, Huron Natural Area, and Kiwanis, each of those ones, if we were to do a more significant overhaul to those, not all of it would be funded by DCs, but a portion of it could, because it's one of the reasons we're doing that is we have more citizens who are traveling to those parks.
And the purchasing of new land for parkland in I guess that would be a neighborhood, that would come out of these fees. Is that the only source of funding for a new park in a not a new neighborhood, but in a neighborhood?
So no, we do not purchase parkland from using the DC reserve. There is a recreational land reserve. So through the Planning Act, there's a separate mechanism to have funding to purchase land for parks, and we cannot use DCs for it. Another way is to have the land conveyed to us through a development or subdivision agreement or what have you. So we actually get land as part of the development process, typically in kind of greenfield development.
Right. Okay. Thank you very much.
No further questions. Please continue.
Right. So we're in the home stretch before we get to some of the more meaty matters. We've got the capital budget process or the capital budget document. There are in the rest of the document, just to go over, it's a similar format to what's been used previously. So we have highlights if there are changes in specific areas, they're highlighted on the page. We have the capital forecast as well, so the proposed capital budget, and if there are any relevant issue papers, those are included by each section. Next slide, please. We've got, we have general provision accounts. So we'd have in some areas something that might say, a parks general provision or a facility general provision that just are a collection of funds, but so that there's more clarity for council and the public, we detail those out in a number of places just for the first year, sometimes two, as to what the work that is planned in those areas. And so if you see something that's a project that's in italics, it means that it's a sub-project of the general provision further up on the page. Again, we've got the capital forecast. It just shows the total by project. It does not have the different funding sources. There is a version available online on the budget page that does break out the various funding sources, but we do not show that in the version that you have with you today in the agenda. Next slide, please. If there are new projects, they're marked with a tick mark. Again, new projects would include any of the detailed projects that are broken out of that would show in italics, as well as other projects that may have been added in. So if you see a tick mark, it means that it's something new. As well, in the project page, you'll see the T, meaning it's a triple funded project that's within the engineering section. You may also see TS, which means that there's sidewalk infill. That's something that a change council asked for a few years ago that makes it clear where there's projects that require some new sidewalk to be built. New project, or next page. In the capital forecast, you'll see as well some A, Bs, and Cs. Those mean that they're give us some relevance as to the quality of the budget estimate, to an earlier question of Councillor Singh. Where we believe we have good information, we would show an A. If it's less quality information, it would be a B or a C. So essentially, as things move closer in the forecast, the quality of estimate will typically go up. There are some things that may have kind of a lower quality of estimate just based on, we don't do this too often, or there's not a lot of good information or data out there on it. I'd say one of the other benefits of passing the budget early is that we would be able to get out to market quicker in the new year and hopefully get better pricing, as people have not already allocated their resources to doing other construction projects and what have you. So there is a benefit of passing the budget in December as opposed to later in January. That should help improve the pricing that we get back. Next slide, please. Next slide, please. So Mr. Lautenbach already touched on this this morning in his part of the presentation. And we've had some discussions about the $1 million and the options that are available. Again, graphically, this just shows what those options are for affordable housing, facility infrastructure gap, and community trails, kind of the benefits or potential scenarios that could come from that. There are issue papers on each one of these in the capital package. And this would be the appropriate time, I'd suggest, Mr. Chair, to have a discussion about the different options available. And it would be helpful for staff, even if there was some indication of, definitely not looking for a vote or a decision today, but if there's some indication kind of what is of interest to council for final budget day.
Certainly. So I would also ask committee, I remember we had, and number one, in case committee forgets, this format was something that council requested. We wanted to be a little bit more nimble as opposed to having our strategic plan laid out. We wanted a little bit more ability to make some choices. So that's why we have this format before us. But I will recall from last year that this was also a bit more contentious, not as collaborative as I would have liked in how these options went down. So I'm just going to assume for the moment that we're going to stick within the $1 million envelope. And if you can see by the options here, it's broken into chunks of $250,000. So my thought was to sort of figure out the will of council. Was everyone perhaps voice your comments here? And also I was thinking that everyone has essentially $250,000 to allocate 4 times, right? So if everyone could email me, or I don't know what process we'd like to use, how you'd like to see that broken up. So basically, if you wanted it all to go into affordable housing, you would put 4 checks into affordable housing. That would be your $3 million. If you wanted to do $500,000 for affordable housing, there'd be 2 checks which would get you to 500, and then 1 for the facilities and 1 for community trails. And that way I could just do an average of what council's collective will is on this and present that at final budget day for someone to move, and then we could obviously tweak it or have discussion after that point. But then it doesn't become a situation where it's the first person to click in, like we saw in the past, which I don't think is really representative. So I would like everyone to please comment on that. If it's a terrible idea, let me know. If you think it's an okay idea, I will proceed. Okay. And sorry, I was talking. I did not see a single hand go up in any order. So I'm just going to go the order I have on the side of my screen here, beginning with Mayor Vomenovich.
Thanks very much, Chair Davey. And I'd be remiss if I didn't, before I ask my question, actually acknowledge that today is the birthday of one of our colleagues, and just wish Councillor Johnson a happy birthday as she sits through budget meeting. We won't do an audit on the number of candles that might be there. I'm sure it's 39. Anyway, with that, back to business. And appreciate obviously all of the work that staff have done on this. In my own view, in light of the many challenges and the fact that it's going to really require an all of community effort to tackle some of the challenges that we're talking about in terms of the affordable housing and the whole housing continuum. My personal preference at this initial stage, at least, and I like your idea of sort of, check marks, and so I'm happy to share those. And I think, at the end you can share those. Publicly on the day, so that it's also very transparent in terms of how people indicated to you, at least initially. My initial inclination would be to see that investment go towards affordable housing. I will say that at the appropriate time, and when we're done this 1 million piece, I do have a request of staff that I'd like to raise for final budget day of some additional information that may see us increase some dollars in this space. And so if you can come back to me at the appropriate time for that, Councillor Davey, I'd appreciate it. But I think we know that there are challenges, ranging from the shelter system all the way through to initial home ownership. I think it's important that as we look at this, we recognize the role that we play versus the role that the region plays as the housing service manager and the shelter service manager. That we recognize the important role that the federal government needs to play in terms of capital dollars and the provincial government in terms of operating dollars. But I think there's also going to be a window in the next little while to tackle this. I mean, this clearly was an issue in the federal election, and both from our big city mayors meeting in October and our recent FCM board meeting last week, it's clear that this is going to be a priority of the federal government. And the provincial government has just announced, I believe it was on Thursday, I got the invite, a housing summit involving all big city mayors and regional chairs for later in December. So I think, making sure that we're well prepared to be able to partner in those initiatives would benefit our community. So those are my thoughts, and thank you.
Thank you, Mayor Rabinovich. Just sorry, Mayor Rabinovich, you wanted to actually just maybe clarify, just so in case we wanted to comment on if you're bringing forward a request of staff that would, for example, aside from this, address some of the affordable housing, that might tweak their preference. So would you want to comment on what that request is now?
Sure, if I can. I mean, my request to staff would be if we were inclined to see that investment grow to either $2 or $3 million. I guess I'd like to understand options of how we might fund that. Councillor Singh, started talking about some ideas, and earlier I think there's different ways, and I think depending on the quantum that we ultimately get to, I'm not assuming that necessarily the answer will be fully in regards to DCs. I mean, there may be a variety of things that we may want to do, but just have the ability to partner with the other orders of government and the opportunities that are clearly going to present themselves in the next while, and also see how we can leverage our historical association with Kitchener Housing, which started as a city department before it ultimately became managed through the region's housing service as a separate not-for-profit that we still play a key role in, and want to potentially be able to leverage that as well.
Okay, thank you. Just before you click off, my internet connection was a bit flaky for a second there. You said additional options for, did I hear an additional 1 or 2 million?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. And as per past practice, I would look to staff to comment if that's if that can be accommodated with an issue paper in time for final budget day. Mr. Lattenbach.
We can certainly take that away and follow up and provide information in terms of what that would mean to try to allocate that amount to this process.
Thank you very much. Okay, so the order I have here, next I have Councillor Schneider.
Thank you, Chair Davey. I'm just wondering if there's any update available from the engagement that's been done on Engage Kitchener on this, so we have an idea of where our residents are wanting this to go.
Mr. Haggie?
Through the chair, we have not pulled the final result. We're closing the survey at the end of this week, or I believe it's actually like on Monday or Sunday or Monday. So no, we have not aggregated all of that. That's one of the pieces that will be coming back as part of final budget day presentation, a summary of where people voted and all that. So council will have that information to make an informed decision on final budget day, but we do not have that yet.
Okay, as soon as we can get that, the better, because it's really important, I feel, that we reflect the wishes of our residents on this. Thanks.
It's an excellent point, Councillor Schneider. Just before we continue, perhaps then in light of my recommendation, I guess 2 things. Number 1, Mr. Haggie, could you confirm when we would have that information? And number 2, if possible, perhaps we could, could staff maybe lead that feedback from members of committee, so there's no bias on my behalf after that feedback comes back, so we can refer to that before making our decisions.
So through you, Mr. Chair, I believe we are closing the survey on, I think it's December 6th, so a week from today. I believe it's closing then. We would be able to get the kind of raw data out to council quickly as far as the overall
preference.
Yeah, how people voted. It takes a little bit of time. Council has previously asked for the information to be kind of collated and grouped and all that sort of thing. So there is a bit of work that doesn't just happen automatically. We need to sift through and organize, but we'd be able to get you the the pie chart of 2/3 voted for this and 10% for that pretty quickly. So
okay.
A week from now.
Okay, and then would staff be able to perhaps just pull members of, like this would be a simple thing, but pull members of council for their preference then, so like I can have that information of council's general preference for final budget day?
Yeah, that we could help organize that. That would be easy enough.
Excellent, thank you. In that case, don't feel the need to pick and choose as you make your comments, members of committee right now. Next is Councillor Singh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Before I begin, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, good. I think I have to start all my questions and comments that way. Mayor Vivenovic has already touched on this a little bit. I think we're pretty much the co-authors of this issue paper asking additional funding availability towards affordable housing. And before I say this, I think it's important for us to recognize affordable housing is a regional mandate. It's a regional jurisdiction. And anything that we are doing is way above and beyond what we have the availability of funds to, or necessarily the responsibility, but we're caring to do something because there is a shortfall. And I think our efforts need to be more specific to where our mandate is to make some big changes, which is through policy. And so my question through the issue paper would be that, in the mindset of helping towards affordable housing, if staff can prepare issue paper of what staff resource would be required from our planning department to look at planning policy to increase supply of purpose-built rentals within the city of Kitchener. I think supply is a key issue when it affects the continuum throughout housing options. And if there's more rental-based affordable housing, that will absolutely help on the lower end of entry level as well. And I think that's something that we're not necessarily addressing. We've looked at a very high level,
but where we need to put key incentives, that's where we need guidance from, and that may have to be done through a staff investigation. So an issue paper on resource that would be required from a planning department to dwell deep into incentivization of purpose-built rentals. So that would be one. The other is my question for clarity. In the issue paper for the $1 million capital that's available for council towards affordable housing, the DC rate for suburban multiple and central multiple is outlined in the report. Is that the city of Kitchener portion or the city and the region combined? Just remind me again for clarity.
Through you, Mr. Chair, the amount shown there is the city portion only.
Okay, so do we have affirmation from the region and the school board that they would forego that DC as well if we were to choose to take the responsible step on our part?
Through the mayor, so the region is waiving DCs, and their reserve balance right now is at $3.2 million for their share of it. I would have to look into the school board portion. I'm not 100% certain on response to that.
So I think in response to us taking the step, we should absolutely make that ask. So we're in preparation of knowing exactly the total impact that we're able to accomplish. And the very least, the ask needs to be made with some shaming. I'm sorry to say it that way, because if we are doing something that's not in our mandate, well, guess what? The school board needs to be at the table as well. We need to incentivize families who need it the most, and those are families with children, and I think that's their mandate as well. So if it's part of the issue paper, staff can respond what the response from the school board would be towards the DCs. The other is, and I think Mayor Vanek has already addressed this, asking additional dollars that could be brought towards affordable housing. So I'm going to go a little deeper to what his request was, because we're kind of almost asking the same thing. The additional dollars, if it were to be through a debt charge, exactly what that debt charge of $1 million or $2 million would be to our tax base as a cost. That debt charge of $1 million or $2 million of two options, how could that be addressed as a capital forecast from this $1 million that's available right now? And from that additional debt charge, could we address it as a purchase of asset? I think that's what's already responded before, that we have to be very clear how we borrowing debt, what the purpose of it is. It has to be towards a capital purchase or a city inventory. So if we are buying property for the purpose of subsidized rental, how can we partner with Kitchener Housing? And I think part of the report, this may be a lot of work, Mr. Chair, you may have to ask staff if they're able to do all of this, but is Kitchener Housing willing to come to the table as a partner if we were to own property and they are managing that asset on our behalf? Because I don't think we need to muddy the waters more than what we have already with, approaching affordable housing and really trying to jump into a mandate that's not ours. So we need clarity. Who's going to manage this asset? And so having that information would be helpful as well. And I think already asked staff as part of, I think, final budget day, outlining what the interest rates are in the past, currently as future projection would be helpful as well. Final comment, I'm taking a lot of time. We're really focusing a lot on affordable housing because that's what the need is currently. And I think it's absolutely important for us to address that. But one thing that we have many members of council taken a passion on is our parks and trails specifically. Our parks have a varied strategy of being addressed through DCs as well as through the parkland charge as well from future development. Trails is that missing link as well as something that doesn't necessarily get addressed as much or touched on. Just an issue paper, not an issue paper, I think it's more of a comment. I think that's something that we can really outline our preferences, but I'll make my comment. I think some of this capital dollars does need to be addressed towards trails, the asphalting and winter maintaining of our trails, or
or really capturing those missing links. So I'll end with that comment. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Okay, so before we continue, I would need to look to staff. So just to in clarity, Councillor Singh, you asked for an issue paper for, let's break them out. So the first was the issue paper with respect to asking staff about what it would take in terms of resources to dedicate a staff person, or if that's what, I mean, if that's the appropriate route, rental.
Just for clarity, so I think this could be something that's on a specific mandate or a topic issue, which is incentivizing affordable, purpose-built rentals. So I think it is prudent to come from capital because it doesn't necessarily need to be a long-term operating cost, because we're looking to address one issue only, be it it's a consultative services or if it's in-house. But it's a specific resource to look at our strategy towards incentivizing or increasing development of purpose-built rentals within the city of Kitchener.
Okay, if staff understands that, I would ask them to comment on whether we would be able to respond in time for, I guess, final budget day. Mr. Reedman.
Through the chair, so it's something I would have to talk to our director of planning and get more information to see, what authority we have on supporting purpose-built rental outside of sort of market forces. I do want to remind council that we have our Housing for All strategy, which has 44 actions that council approved, less than, I believe it was just around a year ago. And that really outlines clear priorities for where our authority is and the investments we should be making in sort of policy changes and incentive programs and other components. And so it would be good for council to sort of refresh themselves with those. I believe there's 44 actions in that Housing for All strategy.
So again, the only thing, Mr. Reedman, if you're unclear, that's okay with if you have to speak to your director of planning. Would you be able to do that in the next? Again, assuming you have the clarity from Councillor Singh, would you be able to get back to us in the next hour so we would be able to know whether that is a reasonable request in time for final budget day or not?
I will give it a shot. I just don't know how much discussion needs to happen around sort of what authority is with the Planning Act and other components of legislation. That there's been a lot of changes lately, and so just making sure we do our due diligence, looking at our legal authority as well as what's permitted in the Planning Act.
Okay.
Chair, just very clearly, just so again you specify this, making sure that my direction is clear. So let me clarify that. I'm looking at our planning policies that help to support, incentivize rental units. I'm not saying we should be paying towards that cost. I'm not saying we should be looking at necessarily deferral of DCs or the waiving of DCs. I'm saying, does our planning policy help support the development and building of purpose-built rentals in our city of Kitchener? And I don't know if that work is already within our strategic plan from our planning department. If it is, great. I haven't seen specific notation to it. If it isn't, what I need from direction from staff is
I understand that. That's a bit different because you did specifically reference hiring a staff person in your original issue paper request. So I guess the question might simply
that
be
was because my question was, do we have the resource? If we don't, then we need to have an issue paper related to the budget impact on that. Thank you.
So if Mr. Reedman, if I'm talking to Ms. Bustamante, could confirm whether that is included in the, I think you said 44 items that we were exploring for affordable attainable housing, let us know. Okay, and sorry, Councillor Singh, and the second part was that an additional issue paper with
yes, towards what Mayor Benick had said, having options of additional $1 million or $2 million. I was further trying to clarify where those options could come from. My perspective was through an issuance of debt, and if the issuance of debt is for the purpose of purchasing, I guess purchasing housing units, how that could be coordinated with Kitchener Housing, of them being an operator and the city of Kitchener being an owner.
Thank you, Mr. Lautenbach.
So in terms of the issue of debt, I was just going to add to previous comments that Mr. Hagee provided related to the reserve itself. So he's correct in that we couldn't actually issue debt for for a contribution to reserve. Certainly we can include in the issue paper some information related to, if we own the asset, that's something we can bring back. But I think what we would do is look at the issue of if we did issue more debt, sometimes that can create some flexibility for trading off funding sources and other projects. So that might be something that we'll look at. But in terms of if the debt is issued, it can't actually be directly for a contribution to the reserve. So I just want to clarify that to make sure that we're clear on that point.
Mr. Chair, your mic's off.
Oh, thank you. Sorry. And Mr. Lautenbach, you would be able to bring that back along with a high level perspective with how that dovetails with Kitchener Housing. Okay. Sorry, Councillor Singh, was there anything else that I missed?
Just regarding the interest rates, but I think staff have already gotten that.
Okay.
I don't think it necessarily needs a direction to have some additional information of past, current, and future projection of how debt interest rates for municipal purposes have seen or looked at.
Okay, very good, thank you. Up next is Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, thank you. Guess I should first say that I won't support the motion to submit our the direction we would like to take at this point. I think, on final budget day, we should all be discussing this openly. And I anticipate receiving further feedback from my constituents after this discussion and as, things get published in the newspaper or wherever.
Yeah, sorry, apologies, Councillor Chapman, perhaps you missed. I actually, when Mr. Haggie brought back and Councillor Schneider brought forward the very important question of the citizen feedback, all that we're looking at doing is waiting till we get the citizen feedback from the surveys. Staff's committed to getting that back to us in the next week and a half, something like that. And then after that, we have that feedback, then we would simply provide our own initial interest, not to be ratified or anything, but just publicly so that we have a starting point. So that's, I'm not presupposing any input we have. And if you decide to change your mind for final budget day, certainly we can have a discussion at that time. I just want to be clear. Thanks.
No, I did catch all of that, but I still don't feel comfortable submitting my initial thoughts on this until I hear back from my constituents and not just the report that's submitted. So I did catch all of that change that you just described.
Very good, thank you.
But I had a couple of questions about the affordable housing issue paper. And I'm fully in support of setting money aside for affordable housing. And if it could be 3 million, I would support that as well. But my concerns are, first of all, and I don't think this is an issue paper, but maybe just clarification, and maybe an issue paper, I'm not sure. What do we mean when we talk about qualifying developments?
Mr. Reedman.
Through the chair. So right now our affordable housing policy and waivers around development applications and other components are, let me just get the exact wording off of our webpage. So a not-for-profit corporation, minimum of 20% of residential units must be set or below 80% of average market rent in the region, and the projects must be within 450 meters of transit corridor across Kitchener is our current eligible projects definition.
So it only goes to not-for-profits and 80% below market value, you said?
Correct.
Okay, thank you. And my second question has to do with what we mean by affordable. Because the 80% below market value is not always what we refer to as affordable.
Through the chair, so I don't know if there's a question in that.
Yeah, no, what do we mean by affordable in the context of this issue paper?
And so through the chair, that's our current definition on our website for other programs that are in place for affordable housing. And so as the issue paper outlines, it would report back with a policy on how this is applied and at what threshold. So right now, the question before council is whether we're applying $250,000, $500,000 or $1 million towards a program. And we would bring back a policy recommendation on what that looks like. And that would have all the details and the content.
Because I worry that if we pass something and then it's like putting the cart before the horse, if we don't know what we mean by affordable, because the term is used so loosely and by different people, then I worry that we're not going to actually be targeting. I just wonder if we could take out affordable, and would this require an issue paper? What would it look like if instead of referring to affordable and supportive housing developments, if we just focused on supportive? Because we know we have over 7,000 households on the affordable housing waiting list, which would be people applying for supportive housing. So I wonder if we could, what it would look like if the issue paper focused just on supportive housing developments.
Point of clarification, Mr. Chair.
Mayor Fabonich?
Thanks. Yeah, I think we have to be careful because we're mixing up language here. And I understand, Councillor Chapman, your question or your concern around affordability, and that's a definition that's determined by the federal government. But when we're talking about supportive housing, we're actually not talking about those 7,000 people on the list. We're talking about a small portion of those people on the list, which are the people who need housing that also have wraparound supports, mental health, addiction, and other kinds of supports. That's a small portion of the overall 7,000 people on the list. So if it's only that portion you're looking to focus in on, then that would be the word. But if you're looking to focus on the 7,000, then we're talking a different thing. So just
Yeah,
for your sake.
Well, okay, thank you for bringing that up. I mean, I was under the understanding, because I questioned this a while ago, that the 7,000 were people that were trying to get supportive housing of some sort. So maybe we need to, I mean, I'm not doubting what you're saying, but that's what I was.
Yeah, so what from a regional perspective, I can, and thanks for the latitude, Chair, to respond to that. They are in need of affordable housing, and they're somewhere on that affordability continuum that may see them, looking for deeply affordable housing because, for example, perhaps they're on the Ontario Disability Program or something like that. Or they, in fact, may be looking for something more rent geared towards income, which would see a higher rent than what we're talking about in terms of those who are on Ontario Disability. But again, they're considered as part of what's that list and what's needed in terms of affordable housing overall.
I see Dan put up his hand.
Mr. Chapman, yeah.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I can clarify from the housing strategy that the targets in Kitchener were 450 supportive housing units, 5,000 community housing units, and 9,000, I believe they were defined, affordable rental units. So the mayor's correct. The true supportive housing need is a small subset of the total housing wait list.
So, but the numbers you just gave add up to more than the 7,000.
And so we can go back to the housing strategy, but those are the 5,000, I believe, would reflect subsidized housing essentially as we know it, and the 450 would be true supportive housing.
So if we went with a concept of subsidized housing, which is, I guess, where I started, or supportive housing, are they the same thing? They're different.
No, they're very different.
Okay, so if we referred to subsidized and supportive housing and took out affordable housing, which I think then grows that list substantially and becomes a bit more vague, could we hone in on supportive and subsidized housing?
And through the chair, the one suggestion I would make, maybe to respond indirectly to the question that Councillor Chapman is posing, I just think of all the work that the community and the members of council did on the Housing for All task force, and we have all the benefit of the data that underpin that strategy, the 44 actions. I think a lot of what council is discussing today relates to key findings of that strategy and actions that council has endorsed. And so my suggestion, Mr. Chair, is that on final budget day, we actually allocate considerable time in the presentation to this issue and look to, to refresh, staff and council on what's in the strategy and then how what you're describing today lines up with those actions, so that even if you don't make a final decision on final budget day or on how to allocate this envelope of funding, you can at least get comfort that yes, it's the right dollar value. These are the areas that we're going to focus in. And to the point that's being made today, we can then come back with a policy with all the detail and definitions to implement it. But you at least have comfort that the envelope is right and that you're moving forward the right areas of the strategy. And I think there's alignment, but I'm just concerned that we don't get too far off course in terms of the strategy that's been endorsed. And I think we can bring that back all together for final budget day.
So would this be considered then an issue paper? I guess is my question.
What I'm hearing council talk about today are areas of priority, right? So I'm hearing council talk about policy issues, about land use and planning issues, about resourcing, about direct investments or use of city land. And so I think, you know, to again hear from council what's important for you, what's top of mind, what areas do you want to see move forward? That's what I'm suggesting that we can bring back, realign with the strategy. You can decide how much you're going to allocate to it. And I fully expect there will be future work in early 2022 to put meat on the bones. And so whether that's a DC waiver policy, to your point, Councillor Chapman, with specific definitions or other priorities, that work can then follow early in 2022.
Okay, thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson, I had you next.
Yes, thank you, Chair Davey, and thank you, Mr. Chapman, as well. My question was along the same line that clearly we're hearing from council today that we really want to have a discussion around affordable housing. I think that it certainly is something that is top of mind for every single councillor here. It's top of mind for our community right now. And I think setting some time aside on budget day to have a really fulsome discussion is going to be really important. My question as well is, and I don't know if this is a question for Mayor Urbanovic to bring up at Region, but I would love to see us somehow champion in the community a fulsome discussion where we bring together the other councils from our region to have the same discussion. You know, we as a community and as Councillor Singh was saying, that it is the purview of the region to deal with housing. We're taking this on as well, and which is exactly what our citizens and I think we as council want to be doing. I would love to see us have a really fulsome discussion with the other regional governments around this. So I don't know if this is something that Mayor Urbanovic needs to champion at regional council, but I really think as we're discussing as a budget, I want to see what other communities are discussing as a budget and where they are. Not that I can dictate to them, we can't dictate to them, but I think that as we look at this as a city government, I would love to see how other communities are looking at this too, and that we all come to the table together to be having this discussion together. So I don't know how we can champion that, but I really think that as part of our budget discussion, we need to be championing that elsewhere. So that is kind of a question / comment. I don't know if Mayor Urbanovic, you want to answer that.
If you want to, Mayor Urbanovic, you're welcome. I don't see that as something that we can incorporate into the actual budget, like incorporate a discussion with the region. I mean, if that's something we wanted to do outside of the budget process.
It would be nice to know, though, as we're approaching our budget, that it's not, you know, that we're kind of coming at it together as not just a region, but as regional governments as a whole.
So I will just respond briefly to it, Councillor Davey, because I mean, you're right, it is sort of stretching a bit outside of specifically our budget. I think Councillor Johnson, you know, you raise an interesting idea. I can tell you that, I mean, a couple of things. Number one, that at the region, there is a affordable housing working group that's chaired by Councillor Erb. And just recently, the staff from the other municipalities have been added to it. And so Andrew Ramsaroop is representing the city of Kitchener on that group. I don't know if there's been a meeting since the staff from the other municipalities have been added. I think they're actually, building on your idea, I think in light of the summit that the province has just called of the mayors and regional chairs on this issue for later in December that I referenced earlier, I think that there actually may be space for a regional version of that following that provincial one. I do know that both Cambridge and Waterloo are taking initiatives like us, not necessarily in the same way. So let's have an offline on that, but I think it's certainly something we can look into.
Thank you. Thank you, Mayor Urbanovic. To me, it's a little distressing to hear that a committee that also includes other regional people on it has just been formed to discuss this, because to me it's a critical issue that we need to be working on as a community as a whole, and not just from the region, but all the separate communities as well. I'm very happy to hear that is happening. So thank you so much. I do have another question. My question is actually around the trails part of the budget, and I see Mr. Lobley is on the call as well. I'm wondering for the community as a whole, if we can just have if he can maybe outline exactly whenever we say, and maybe we can put the slide up again with the choices on there, and I appreciate that. But so when we say one choice would be 2,200, and thank you, sorry, I'm going to need the slide to make sure I'm getting that. Yes, 2,200 meters. I almost said kilometers. Wow, that would be huge, of trails, as opposed to 1,100 and 550. And Councillor Singh was talking about this as well. If maybe he could just reiterate what that means. Does it mean winter servicing and asphalt, or just developing more meters of trails?
Mr. Lobley.
Good morning, Council. Good morning, Chair Davey, and thank you for the question, Councillor Johnston. So the issue paper outlines both an operating and a capital impact. So the direction for this, in all three options, would be paving of existing granular trails and taking them into the winter maintained program. So the operating impact of option one would be an additional $6,000 a year to accommodate that winter maintenance. Option two would be $12,000 a year. And option three would be $24,000 a year to undertake the winter maintenance on those trails.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. Next is Councillor Ioannidis.
Thank you, Chair Davey. I'm really liking the discussion that's going on right now. I didn't anticipate this, but it's really great to see that everyone's somewhat is concerned with at the level that the community is concerned, and it's really good. And I think we really need to raise our stakes in this. And so the question I want to ask with regards to the 48, it's the 48 items that are on the Housing for All strategy. We don't have a specific funding source for that. Is that correct?
We don't have the strategy yet. So, Mr. Reedman?
The chair. So I went back to double check. So it's 43 action items in the strategy. We do have $125,000 set aside annually towards affordable housing. We have an FTE resource within the EDI office that's meant to lead that, plus supports in other areas like planning, economic development, and otherwise that would support policy development and other components. And so outside of that right now is our funding commitment. And then we do have some existing waivers around building permits and other components that are already in place that council approved, I believe, initially back in 2007. And I see Mr. Chapman has put up his hand, but that right now that's the extent. And so this will be looking at adding additional capital to fund this.
The other part, Councillor Ioannidis, as you're aware, there's a significant allocation in Make It Kitchener 2.0 in the Economic Development Reserve, but that'll be contingent on land sales. And so those funds really don't become available until we start unlocking Brom Yards and other properties to free up that cash flow.
Okay. So, and I don't disagree with the approach that we have done in the past with regards to the funding and all that stuff, but I really believe that the situation has gotten way worse since we've started with the Housing for All and some of the dollars that we've committed to, even with Make It Kitchener. And I'm wondering, and I just wanted to see whether or not if we could maybe tag on some of what the mayor and Councillor Singh has added, that we do look at maybe a specific levy just for affordable housing on the tax levy, and whether it be whatever 0.25% or whatever, and then whether funding from the federal government or provincial government come in, then we can scale back those levies or whatever. So that's kind of where I'm kind of looking at.
I would look to staff. I obviously have my own comments. I'll reserve them at the end. Look to staff to respond to that request.
So a special levy was something that we had brought forward with some information to council when we were dealing with a facility issue. So we could certainly look back and just add some information in terms of what that looks like in terms of dollars it would bring in. But it would be a tax over and above what's proposed.
I understand that, and again, like I mentioned, I think it's become situation critical since the last time we've dealt with the housing strategy. So I want everything on the table when we're discussing this further.
And the other comment that I would also share is that given the region is the main provider for affordable housing, I think the other challenges with a special charge would be looking at that in terms of if there are issues, particularly levying something that is related to obviously our own services that would tie into what we would do versus what the region would be responsible for.
Again,
Mr. Chapman?
And I don't disagree. I think there can be specific focuses where we direct our our funding and all that stuff. So I don't want to see any overlapping as well. And then before anyone else goes on, I'm with Councillor Singh and Councillor Johnston with regards to some form of with our continued investment with the community trails.
Mr. Chapman?
I'll provide a neutral comment in response to Councillor Naitis. We've had a long-standing tax policy at the city, which has served the city well, but it's really been about maintaining services at the rate of inflation. And so largely, stability within a stable environment. We're actually in a minority in the region in terms of municipalities that have adopted special levies. So I think if some of the townships have adopted and consistently run special levies for greening infrastructure, I believe the region and the Mayor could comment is looking at a capital levy for housing investment this year. Waterloo does it for infrastructure replacement. So this would be a significant departure in tax policy for council. But at the end of the day, if council believes that a significant incremental investment is required, it is a strategy that you could employ. And so we've done calculations on this before for infrastructure. We can certainly report back to help you understand if you were to apply a special levy, what sort of cash flow that would generate. And again, to my earlier point, how that can help to advance the 43 actions in the Housing for All strategy. So we can bring that.
That's exactly, Mr. Chapman. Thank you for that. And again, I'm not an issue paper again, and I don't know all the facts and everything else, and I still want to be more informed. But again, I think, as I mentioned before, I think it's become situation critical with affordable housing, and I think we need to advance this this file more quickly than we have in the past.
Mr. Reedman.
The only other component that I'll add is that one of the actions within those 43 actions is to investigate a community improvement plan for affordable housing. And so that is a policy mechanism where we can look to secure funding. And so that is one of the actions that is planned to move forward in the coming years. And so that is another tool in the toolbox to help bring more affordable housing to Kitchener.
Thank you. Councillor Galvez-Seelock.
Yeah, I'm on board with where the discussion's going, but I have some concerns with leaving the facility infrastructure gap out of the equation as well. So I'm wondering, my question would be, are we able to issue debt as we were talking about for affordable housing? Would we be able to do that, issue debt for facility infrastructure gap or with the community trails?
Who would like to respond to that?
I will, Mr. Chair. Yes, those would qualify as being debt funded.
Okay, so I guess it's difficult because I agree with all the affordable housing and maybe increasing the funding for affordable housing, but also know that we have a large infrastructure gap, facility infrastructure gap, and I know community trails are important as well. So I'd like to see within, I guess, the issue paper that's coming forward with regards to debt issuance for not just affordable housing, but also what that could look like for facility infrastructure gap and the community trails. I think it's important for us to make sure we keep all options on the table today because we haven't heard from the public feedback yet. As Councillor Schneider has pointed out, the community engagement that we haven't seen the results. So I want to make sure we have options for all three of these moving forward and have that information available for us to make that decision on final budget day.
Very good, thank you. Councillor Marsh.
Yeah, thanks. I agree that affordable housing has become the top priority in our community more than ever, and I look forward to a potential meeting of the minds, not just with the other councils in our region, but if we were to do a session that would be ideally led by the region, that we would also have the subject matter experts who are, the people who represent the agencies that are on the ground working with those most in need. So the thing that I think we are needing to remember is that we as the council members we have information that we have, but then we are only working with what we are told or what we are given or what we see. We're not working with the day-to-day, and there's probably useful information that can help guide our decisions in what might be top priority in terms of funding. And perhaps some of those items will not be in our list of 43 action items that came out of our Housing for All strategy because they might be more emergent recent issues. So I would just ask that we put that to mind. Yeah, and so with regard to the three options in front of us today, I agree with what's been said so far in terms of affordable being the top priority. Community trails are also very much something that the community has told us time and again, we need more. We need more winter maintenance. The facility infrastructure gap, of course, that's important, but I'm just wondering what is the level of urgency there? And if we don't do it now, if we delay it, what would be the impact? So I guess there's a little question in there. Tell us if we could hear from staff, what happens if we don't do anything at Lyle Hallman Pool yet?
Ms. Golder.
The chair, if we don't do the upgrade, so there's a significant backlog in terms of facility-based needs. And so what the additional funding options does is it reduces the backlog by the corresponding amount. So the projects that you see before you, there was a detailed exercise this year through the Facility Infrastructure Program to identify and prioritize investment needs. And so should these items not move forward as part of this year's investment, they would be captured in the prioritization of future years' investment. And so there's still a requirement to invest in these in these projects, but it would reduce our ability to invest as quickly in terms of addressing the infrastructure gap.
Right, and so with regard...
Sorry, Mr. Chapman, you want to add?
Oh, go ahead.
And I would just, again, remind council that you've already allocated a new funding stream to the facility infrastructure deficit. So I believe over half of the EDIF debt room is going now to fund replacement. So there's a new envelope and a growing envelope of funding. There is no such envelope for affordable housing. And so again, I won't presuppose where council goes on final budget day, but my suggestion would be if housing is a priority that I'm hearing on in this conversation right now, there is a funding stream for facility infrastructure repair. There is no funding stream for housing. And so it would stand on its own in that respect.
Thank you. And so further to that, that line of thinking, I'm just wondering, as we replace things like efficiencies for comfort station water sources and LED lights, are we not then improving on our operational costs, as we've said in previous years? And so wouldn't that then help improve our efficiencies and lower our costs overall?
Ms. McGoldrick?
So through the chair, yes, as part of the selection of prioritization of projects, we look at both energy efficiency opportunities as well as accessibility. So that all forms assessments done of our own building condition and opportunities for investment. So as you've mentioned, each of these have energy efficiencies built into them. And so by implementing them sooner, we would realize efficiency benefits in terms of utility costs.
Mm-hmm. Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Before we go back to Mayor Vermanovic, I need to ask a very broad question because it's one that I'm growing increasingly concerned about. When I first joined council, our jurisdiction on affordable housing was policy. And believe me, we all saw what happened last week. We're all sensitive to it, especially now. But my overriding concern is jurisdiction and who the public goes to when they want to see action on this. So we moved from policy, 10 years ago to now discussions about direct subsidy and taking on debt at the lower tier. So in order for me to have comfort in this, I need clear direction from someone on where the jurisdictional lines are drawn. So we know who to point to and who should be funding it. So my question to staff is, are you prepared to answer that question today? Or is this something that I need to ask for clarity in terms of an issue paper so I can make a jurisdictional decision come final budget day?
So through Mr. Chair, I'll provide the short answer today, and I would suggest it's good to workshop this on final budget day with council. And I think this is an important discussion and the detail needs to come back. But social housing was a federal mandate. And around 2000, through an agreement with the province, social housing was transferred to become a provincial mandate. And then through provincial legislation, the province designated service managers across the province to administer social housing. And in our region, the region of Waterloo is the housing services manager. So they're responsible for administering and funding social housing and maintaining service level standards. That's social housing. In terms of supportive housing, it's funded by the Ministry of Health, Ministry of Children, Community and Social Services, and Ministry of Municipal Affairs and Housing. And again, the ministries provide funding to 47 local service managers, and they deliver housing and homelessness services across the province. The region is the housing and homeless services manager in our region. And so when we come back to council, we want to be clear on that. And again, do our very best to say, how can you get maximum leverage from any investment you make within the areas that are either uniquely or primarily the city's responsibility? Because my suggestion is the more that we enter into areas that are rightly the purview of the feds, the province, or the region, the leverage is diminished. And so again, I'll leave it at that for now, but that will be the focus of our conversation when we come back in December.
Okay, and just one quick follow-up question then. So the region is the manager, and where do they get their funding from for the projects and the operating?
So that's detail I won't speculate on now. I mean, I have an answer, but I want to provide a factual response. The mayor may want to comment on that, but I believe the answer is it's a mix. That there is some regional funding, but as we know, a lot of federal, provincial, and external funding as well. But we can have more detail on that when we come back in December.
Okay, thank you. And I guess my concern is just, I absolutely get affordable housing is the number one issue that we're facing. But my concern is whether it's our jurisdiction to deal with. And the challenge I have is that, if we start putting off some of the items like the facility infrastructure gap and subsidizing other levels of government, that's just going to put future councils at disadvantage for what's actually in their wheelhouse. So we need clarification on that for sure. And I would add to that, in my respect, to be frank, the most nonsensical level to raise taxes for affordable housing is the municipal level. When we raise taxes at the municipal level, we raise everyone's costs. We probably literally put people that could afford their homes out of being able to afford their homes, trying to help others. This has to be taxed based on people's ability to pay. And the only levels of government that can do that are the provincial government, the federal government. They can tax wealthy people, they can tax high income people. We cannot. We hurt the same single mother struggling in a house, we raise taxes as we do, two wealthy tech people in a condo, because both their houses are appraised the same. It makes zero sense for us, in my mind, to be looking at raising taxes to solve an affordable housing crisis when taxes are part of the problem. Anyway, sorry, a bit of a tirade. It's a challenging one for me. Anyway, looking at this list, I will notionally support certainly some money for affordable housing in the $1 million. I really need to see some support to the community trails and the facility infrastructure cap in there as well. And going forward, I almost wish that it was when it comes to facility infrastructure gap, I honestly don't care whether it's Lyle Hellman Pool or not, because it's going to get fixed at some point in the future anyway. I really almost wish it was a notional amount of dollars that we say we're going to help to close that gap. So, because that is squarely in our jurisdiction. So sorry for the tirade there, but I don't know. I'm very sensitive about meeting the mandate of the people in terms of what they think is a reasonable tax increase. There's two people back in the queue here, Mayor Verbenovich.
Thanks. Two points. I want to go back to Councillor Johnston's comments earlier, because I think I may have not provided, or maybe there was some misunderstanding in terms of what I said. There has been a group, and in fact, there's multiple groups that are dealing on various aspects of the housing continuum that exist in the region. There is the group at the region, which is a working group of council that Councillor Erb chairs. There are also a number of working groups that involve staff from various, from both the region and various community partners that are involved in supplying services to these residents. So there's an adult men working group, there's an adult woman working group, there's a youth women working group, there's an unsheltered homelessness working group. There's also work being done at the New Ontario Health Team, and there's also a Serving Black, Indigenous, and People of Color working group. And so each of these working groups have staff representatives on them. And in fact, it was through the CAO Pandemic Control Group that the suggestion was made that city staff be included in some of these working groups, and that idea came from our own CAO, Dan Chapman, and has been adopted and is working its way into those various groups. So I don't want there to be the impression to Councillor Johnston or anyone else that this work is just starting. It's been in place for a long time. The only thing that's adding is that there is a new role for or a new opportunity for municipalities who want to be engaged to be involved in it. On the second issue, Chair Davey, that in your points and Councillor, sorry, Mr. Chapman's clarification, he is right. It is a mixed bag in terms of where the funding comes from. I would say that the general view is that capital dollars come from the federal government. Operating dollars typically come through the provincial government. And then the region obviously invests in it along with not-for-profit groups. So you do, for example, at the project that was built in your ward recently at I guess it's Bridgeport and Lancaster. There was community fundraising that was done by that. Former Mayor Zara, in fact, chaired the fundraising committee for it. And so they raised dollars for that not-for-profit project that also received, federal funding that flowed through the region to that project. So it really is a mixed bag in terms of how this happens. I think there is, a strong point to be made around jurisdiction and where can we leverage our role and our investments in the best way possible to get the biggest bang for our buck going forward. Often being able to leverage dollars from these other partners because of our involvement. And I think that's where we need to focus, and just making sure that we have the dollars available for that leveraging when those opportunities present themselves. So hopefully that information is helpful to you and other members of council.
Thank you. Last, we have Councillor Marsh.
Yeah, thanks. I just want to add further clarification. I felt that our Housing for All strategy, which was lauded by council and supported unanimously, really helped to debunk the myths about jurisdictional challenges. And I can understand why, this has to get reemphasized from time to time, but affordable housing absolutely has city, it's within our purview, it's within our jurisdiction to partner and to certainly, as is supported by the staff option here in the capital investments, DCs are our purview. Nobody else can fund or give a discount on DCs other than us for cities DCs. That's us. And there's lots of other options within the strategy that I think would be incumbent upon us to refresh our memories about. Hopefully staff, if you can just resend the PDF so that it's at the top of our email boxes, which are crowded, I'm sure. But let's revisit those and make sure that we have those in mind when we're re-entering the discussion about affordable housing next month. Thanks.
Thank you, Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, thank you. I'm just thinking, so we talk about, there's been talk about, possibly growing I'm going back to the affordable housing issue, growing the pot to, $2 or $3 million. And my question would be, what capacity does the region have to actually ensure that any more money that we were to designate for that to actually build those additional units? I mean, I know maybe it's not an easy question to answer, but if you've got $1 million and it's going to go toward the 300 units, and you double that, you've got 600 units, etc. Is this something that the region has in their forecast?
So David, did you want me to respond to that, or?
If you like, I was looking for a staff kind of statement, but if you know the answer, Mayor Mavich, please.
Well, I don't know the full answer, but what I would tell you is the region's allocating, and it's still in discussion, a range of dollars towards affordable housing. It's also which would be local investment. It's also counting on being able to leverage investments from the federal money and the provincial, from the federal government and from the provincial government going forward. One example of that, Councillor Chapman, was in fact the RHI money that the City of Kitchener partnered with, the Rapid Housing Initiative, with the YW, which has built the 41 units of supportive housing for women on our land next to the Country Hills branch of the public library. And so, it's anticipated that there'll be more RHI money in the future. That certainly, that has been part of the dialogue with the federal government as recently as last week. And, I think in light of the mentions around affordable housing in the throne speech, their election commitments and so on, over the coming months and in the spring budget, we anticipate that these are all going to be priorities.
Yeah, and I know it's a difficult question to answer, but I just wondered if we have a sense of, we're talking about Kitchener, just Kitchener, not the whole region. And anyway, I think you've answered my question. Thank you.
Thank you. No further questions, Mr. Haggie, if you wanted to continue.
Sure. Can we advance the slides, please?
Sorry, before we jump in, Mr. Chair, I apologize for the interruption. Can we maybe have a 5-minute break?
Oh, yeah, it's actually a good idea. Let's break. Let's meet back at just after like 5 minutes after noon. Does that work for everyone? Yeah. Okay. 5 minutes after noon. Thank you. Okay, I could kindly ask folks to turn on their cameras so we can continue when we get quorum. Oh, that's definitely enough. Mr. Haggie, if you're there, if you'd like to continue.
Gladly, the last section we're getting to, and essentially the end of the presentation part is up next. We'll get into capital forecast. This is often called the page flip. Can we advance the slide, please? So just a note, things that have changed in the capital forecast that are worth more than $250,000 been highlighted in the slide deck, except the items that are noted on here. We don't know every single change. But if it's over $250,000, you generally would. Things that are more than $1 million in total also have an issue paper related to them, except for the instances noted here. So I do not intend on presenting any more, Mr. Chair. I would even suggest that this that the slide deck not be put up at this point. I think it's probably easier for people to just highlight the areas that they want to talk about. You would normally add the, say we're doing from this page to that page. And if there are any questions, I think it's probably simpler for people to be able to see each other at this point in time. I'll stop there.
Okay, certainly. So what we'll do is, I noticed that the rest of the slide deck does have inserted budget changes. So if anyone wanted to raise, if anyone has any questions, we will guess. Okay, so we're starting out with page 1. So let's go down to, let's make it just, let's go to page 14. So that'll cover any of the issues that are in between up to page 14. Give folks a second to take a look.
Scott, page 14, is this which one is this on the budget overview?
At the end of the slide deck. So not all the pages have page numbers, but the ones in the summary, sort of the summary by project area does. So you'll notice in the bottom left-hand corner.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, so you'll get to page 1 of 63. So I'm suggesting we go to page 14 at this point. So this is digitally, this is one of the parts where I miss the paper because it's a lot easier to flip through than it is to flip through.
Like, what is it digitally on the digital? Do you know the digital one?
It's to page 102.
So
page 102.
Scott, perhaps
yes. Oh, actually, yeah, I do. Page 102 in the top corner, page 14 on the actual slide deck.
Scott, perhaps staff can pop the page that you reference onto the screen. And that way, yeah, that way everybody knows and the public knows as well.
Through the chair, I'm just grabbing the agenda page.
We do have a question, Councillor Singh.
Yeah, thank you, Chair Davey. This is for page 100 on the full deck. Well, I guess, or page 9 of 63. For print shop equipment, this is something that's been raised in the past as well. We do have a print shop department. Have we considered contracting the service out? Are there savings if we were to do that as opposed to having an in-house service?
Ms. Robb?
So I'm just looking to see if Ms. Rowland is on as well. But if not, I can respond. Through you, Chair Davey, yes, you'll recall Councillor saying that in the past, Council has asked us to review the print shop in terms of its entire operation. So we did begin that work. It's underway and we look forward to coming back to you in the new year.
Thank you, but at this point we're budgeting $460,000. How far along is that review?
Through you, Chair Davey, it'll come back to Council in the new year, in the first quarter.
And I guess then there would be some changes to that based on even the allocated budget, depending on the recommendations.
Yeah, I would say it's too early to speculate on what changes would be coming to the capital budget as a result of the review, but certainly if there are any implications to the budget, they would be shared with you at that time.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Singh. Councillor Marsh.
Yeah, I'm interested to hear a little bit about staff's plans for the corporate planning process. We have a budget on page 4 of 63 or page 89. Just asking to have a little bit of information about what those plans are.
So, Mr. Chairman, I can take that.
Please.
So through you, as council members will recall, some of you were around the table at the time and others I know are familiar with the process. It's 20 years ago now that the city set its current community vision. And we've been well served by that very inclusive process through 5 successive strategic plans. But as you know, that plan reached its end of life midterm this council term. And so what this project really is about is entering into a new process with the community and with council to cast a new 20-year vision that will take us into the next generation for the city of Kitchener. And it's no understatement to say that the decisions that you make through this process will steer this organization for 2 decades to come. That was our experience before. And so it's important that we take a thoughtful and inclusive approach. We've talked a lot about the social foundations that council feels are important in the community. We know that there are planetary limits that we need to plan within. And so these will be considerations that we'll be setting our minds to using data through this process. There are 4 streams of work. We touch on them in the slide deck. But one thing that's important and significantly greater in scope and depth than typically is done in our planning cycles is to apply a broader and equity-based community engagement to this process. We've dipped our toe in the water, but this will be a new endeavor and a significant one for us as we go through the process. I would note that the funding for the initiative comes from the allocation already received through the Canada Community Building Fund, formerly the federal gas tax, and this fund can be used for investing in capacity building for resilience. And so we're really excited to be in this place. I didn't have the privilege of being here 20 years ago when we went through this work, and so I'm excited to journey through this with council, with the community over the next 2 years.
That's exciting. Thank you very much. I also am pleased to see before us the Indigenous Reconciliation Plan. And I'm just wondering, to what degree will we be advancing that work in this term of council? I see that we have 50,000 in each of the next 2 years. And I'm just curious, is it a 2-year process or is it 2 phases?
So through the chair, the Reconciliation Action Plan isn't necessarily a standalone document. It's an ongoing body of work. So there's never going to be a time when we're going to continue to evolve relationships and continue to evolve actions being taken. And so it's not the typical kind of strategy or body of work where you would see a final report and it gets put on a shelf. It's an ongoing conversation and a prioritization in terms of the actions that the city and other area municipalities should be taking. So as part of the regional collaborative in terms of the Reconciliation Action Plan Working Group, it was recognized that there are some barriers in terms of advancing the work, primarily through funding for engagement opportunities, honorariums, looking at communications and really partnerships with universities in terms of research supports and additional resources to advance the work. And so this is the City of Kitchener's contribution for 2 years into the work. We anticipate that obviously there's a significant body of work initially. We'll be reassessing Kitchener's contribution along the way, but it is funded through a collaborative across the area municipality. So each area municipality is putting forward a funding request to fund this body of work.
Okay, thanks for that clarification. I do appreciate that. I will say that as much as this work is the type of thing that's ongoing and needs to be continually updated, I'm really proud that our strategic plans are not the kind of thing that we put on a shelf and let it collect dust in general, right? At least that's That's the way I see it. So, but that's good. And thanks for clarifying. I'm looking forward to hearing more about that work. I guess what I was hoping for is a placeholder or, a report back that will happen on a semi-regular basis so that council and the members of the public can be updated about where we're at with that work and what are our goals going forward as the iterative process becomes more clear. So if you can just let us know that for sure we will get an update in the next year, that would be helpful.
Through the chair, I can confirm that we will be reporting back to council in the upcoming year, as well as looking towards what that regular cadence of reporting, both from an Indigenous-centered, Indigenous-led prioritization process, so regularly connecting in and prioritizing, and then also reporting that feedback back to council in terms of prioritization of actions.
Thank you.
Very good, thank you. Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, thank you for that, Councillor Marsh. Maybe Ms. McGoldrick, could you come back for just one quick question? And that is, you say that all of the municipalities have contributed to this this item. What was the distribution of contributions?
So through the chair, and great question, Councillor Chapman. So the total reconciliation action plan working group budget for 2022 is just under 200,000. The cost share allocation assigns 50% of the total cost to the region. And then the 50% allocation in terms of the lower tier area municipalities are distributed based on population. So that's how the funding formula is working.
Okay, thank you. I had another question, and it's on page 101 or 10 of 63. And it has to do with home technology. And I was just wondering, it looks like there's an increase every 5 years. So I assume in 2020 or 2021, I don't know when we would have, maybe 2020, we probably outfitted everyone who was going to be working from home. So I'm just wondering why our first jump is smaller than the 5-year jumps that we see subsequently.
So through you, Chair Davey, that number reflects the influx for when there is a new council that comes in. And so those, whether it's those of you who have been reelected or new members of council, the money starts in the election of the new term of council.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, I'm not seeing any other questions, so we'll move ahead. I did notice that some of the page numbers as written are out of order. So if you skip it, if you see a number that you're skipping it, just keep going, you will find it. But I think the next group we'll go to will be page 45 of 63 or 128 of 197. Okay, so up to page 45 or 128 if you're using that figure. It's probably easier to use the 128, assuming it lines up. Okay, on that point too, if anyone's, I know sometimes readers can interpret them differently. So if anyone's 128 doesn't line up with 45 and 63, please let me know. Councillor Singh.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair. I'll be going by the full package page numbers, if that's okay. That's just how I had taken notes down. So this is on page 109, master plan studies. And so my question would be for clarity. I think this is part of the issue paper that I requested of, I guess, additional either resourcing or the need to put effort into our planning policy towards helping to support, or not support, but helping to encourage purpose-built rentals. Would this be the area where it would be budgeted out for master plans and studies?
Councillor Singh, sorry, could you repeat the page number?
Page 109, I believe it would be 109.
109, okay, sorry.
So page 15 of 63.
Okay, yes, that's 107 for me for some reason, but okay. So good stuff. Who would like to answer that? Mr.
Through the
May?
Chair, I'll just jump in. This is community services planning and what have you. The planning page is later in development services.
All right. Okay.
So it will come later in the package.
No, that's fine. I have that in page 129 as well. Planning studies, general. Okay. So the other question I have in this section would be for community services, page 22 of 63 or page 110 of 199. This is for Love My Hood implementation. I see that we have 150,000 budgeted across the 10 years. Have staff looked at a strategy towards increasing capacity for funding towards across the 10 years through assistance of sponsorship dollars? So funding sponsor for Love My Hood strategy, where we could budget an additional amount, and I guess our sponsorship office would help to find some synergies or abilities of attracting, dollars from the corporate field that would want to put their name along our Love My Hood strategy.
Through you, Mr. Chair. In the past, we've actually received some significant funding from the KW Community Foundation and the United Way in order to help fund this program. Staff do intend either in 2022 or 2023 to come back with, for lack of a better phrase, Love My Hood 2.0 that looks at the future of this program. And so that will certainly be something that we'll be looking at is funding through a variety of sources.
Mr. May, I appreciate that, and I think this is definitely in great hands, where staff are actively looking for increased ways to increase the capacity, and I appreciate that. The reason why I'm pushing for more of a accelerated approach is we've gone through a really tough time through the pandemic, and whichever ways we can kind of hang our hat on in showing that we're broadening community services or support, especially when it comes in celebration and small improvements at a micro level that have effect at a large macro level, that would be great. Would it be out of step to ask for an issue paper that staff put to mind of how we could increase this budget through that sponsorship strategy into 2022?
Mr. May?
Through you, Mr. Chair, we're certainly in council's hands. I am concerned about staff's capacity to take on this new initiative. We have no experience that says to us there are community needs beyond the $150,000 a year. Our intention was to run the program at that level for several years and then come back to council with data and facts and potentially recommend an increase at that time if it's warranted. We're in your hands.
Are we getting? So my question is for clarity: are we getting less applications than the 150 there that's allotted already? So if that's the case, then obviously then that's a futile exercise. But if the demand is more than what we're budgeting, then we need to look for ways to increase that capacity.
Through you, Mr. Chair, two things. No, we're getting more requests than we have budget for, but often they are ruled out. As an example, they don't meet the criteria for the grant. But I think what we've learned in previous years with this grant is we can't increase it unless we also bring along the staff capacity to do so, because these are very labor intensive to support the community groups. And so my concern would be if we're looking to increase the capital funding, this team is already fully tapped out trying to implement a plan at $150,000.
Not to exhaust this, Mr. May, if we were to look at those sponsorship synergies, could we not use the allocated 150 towards additional staff resource while still bringing in additional capital dollars?
Through you, Mr. Chair, my experience is that we could actually end up spending more time and staff time and salary dollars to collect those funds.
Okay, all right. Well, again, you've said that your staff are underway in investigating. I wish you good luck, and this is a great program. And over time, I hope to see it broaden. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Galloway-Seelock.
Yeah, are we on, what page are we going up to?
Up to 45 or 128 is per my reader.
I'm on the right page then. Page 17 of 63 or page 116 of 199 with regards to KMAC and arenas. I bring this up every year. I know that we're supposed to be doing an ICE needs assessment. I'm just curious as to where that is because I still don't see on the end of the 10-year capital forecast in ARENA. So I just look to Mr. May, I guess, for an answer on that.
Yeah. So through you, Mr. Chair, we had intended to complete a NICE study. I believe it was going to be either last year or this year. Unfortunately, due to COVID, it's simply a really bad time to do that. The user groups are in no place right now to be able to project several years out in terms of what their needs are going to be. And so we will be doing some of that work starting next year.
Okay, thank you. I still would like to see at the end of the capital forecast in ARENA, but I'll let it go again this year.
Thank you. Not seeing any more questions in this section. So let's move to page 48 of 63, or on mine, it's 158. It might be a little bit 158 of 197 on some of yours might be a little bit further along. Councillor Singh.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm looking at now page 44 of 63 or 129 of the whole package. So again, back to my planning studies for growth and in general. So questions staff, would this be an area where we were looking at, I guess, broadening funding to capture additional studies that could help support I keep on saying the word support, but studies to encourage or help along accelerated rental development, purpose-built rental development.
I'd like to respond.
Through the chair. So yes, this would fund those types of studies. I do know when council identified their priorities for the policy planning team, the official plan was one that was coming up shortly, and that would be an appropriate area to incorporate Councillor Singh's request. We can report back through that through an issue paper as well.
Perfect. That would be great. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, I was just wondering on the same page if we could get some more details of the heritage funding that's being proposed. What falls under each category? Sorry, it's page 44 of 63 or 129.
Through the chair, we could follow up with an email to council to outline what each of those categories represent.
Okay, I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
Sorry, Councillor Schneider.
Thank you, Chair Davey. My question is on page 142 of 197. Under transportation services and traffic calming, we were able to do a pilot project for please slow down signs this year that we councillors were able to distribute to residents in areas that were experiencing some issues. I'm just wondering if there are enough funds in the traffic calming budget to continue this program on an ongoing basis.
Mr. May.
Yes, so through you, Mr. Chair, I do believe that there are enough funds to continue to create some of those signs next year. I think at that point, we would have to reevaluate. At some point, putting too many signs out becomes ineffective. So I do think there's enough for this year. And depending on, or for next year, and depending on how next year goes, we may look at it more comprehensively and come back to council with a recommendation and potential budget impacts.
Yeah, okay, no, I think it was great because we're in situations where we obviously can't do a traffic study on each street, and not every street can have a middle of the road delineator or the mobile speed display sign. So having these signs, actually is a sign that we are responding to what our residents are telling us. And I found them to be much appreciated in my ward for sure. So thanks for that.
Very good, thank you. And I completely agree. Councillor Michaud.
Thank you. Yeah, I want to thank Councillor Schneider for bringing this up. If I'm correct, did you, Mr. May, did you say that it's like the status quo? You're going to keep the same amount that we received last year, or are we getting an increase in signs?
For you, Mr. Chair, what I said was, I think we have existing funding that has been earmarked for some additional signs next year. My understanding is that, as an example, not all counselors have allocated their full allotment. And so we need to go back and find out if it is their plan, or can we take those back and redistribute them. But even after that, we do have some funding to print additional signage if needed.
Okay, I know for Ward 4, we would be looking for additional signs. It's a very large area to cover, and those signs were effective in some areas. And I understand what you're saying, Mr. May, about, too many signs, it just becomes like sign pollution and everybody ignores it. But if you spread it out further, it just becomes kind of an awareness thing everywhere. So I hope that we can get more. Thanks.
Very good. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair Davey. And my question as well is on traffic calming. And I just wanted to figure out if, I know that we had asked in last year's budget for us to increase the number of the flexi delineator signs in each ward. And I believe that they had been increased by, and I'm trying to remember off the top of my head, it was either 3 or 4 extras in each ward. Because of the pandemic, we weren't able to, we had ended up putting them up only in the locations that had previous, the previous anchors put in the road for last year. I'm wondering if that means that this year we'll get that increase of the signs. Were they used, or do we need to rethink that and be looking at asking for more this year?
Through the chair. So in 2020, that was the year that we relied on the locations that were done in 2019. In 2021, we were actually able to expand the number that were given that we had agreed upon through the budget deliberation in year previous. So what I would suggest at this time is that we work with council early in the new year to focus on that same number. And I believe it was up to around 12 signs per ward, with one of those being a rather new design. So it was the center delineator with the curb line flex sticks as well.
Thank you. You are anticipating my follow-up question then, Mr. Cronkite. So with that, I had thought that we would be getting kind of 3 more signs in the ward, but what we got, and they're wonderful, but would be the center delineator and then the 2 signs, let's say on the edges of a cycling lane, were also counted then as signs. They are signs, but I was thinking we were going to get 3 new locations, but that is not what we ended up getting. So I would personally like to see us put into the budget to get, instead of having, kind of that 3-in-1 sign, to be able to have 3 more locations. So that's I'm hoping to get council support on getting some more actual sign locations to be able to go into our wards for next year.
So through the chair, I would suggest that we can accommodate an additional 1 or 2 signs per ward within the existing budget. I do want to highlight, though, that there are a substantial number of these out in the neighborhood, and from a traffic calming perspective, the new type that we demonstrated last year. So again, the center flexible delineator with the curb line delineators are a very impactful tool. They were much more effective at reducing operating speed. So rather than recommend additional locations, I would recommend that we work with council to work on those 1 or 2 more problematic locations and really focus on an enhanced measure rather than trying to increase the number of signs overall.
Okay. Yeah, I found they were very, very useful. I agree. They did really slow down traffic. The issue is that we do have so many places in our wards where people would like to see a sign. So that becomes the other part of the issue, that, one area gets really well serviced, whereas some of the other areas don't. So I'll leave that with you, and I look forward to our further discussions then on that, Mr. Cronkite. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, I'm not sure what page this would go on, and it's really looking into the future, but I'm thinking it might fall on page 111, which is 23 of 63. And what I'm wondering is if we could, I noticed there are gaps in the budget, that some projects that have yet to start, some that will start later, or that will finish earlier. But I was wondering if it's possible to get an item added, and I don't know if this is an issue paper or what it involves, but to have something to cover the some community infrastructure of some sort at the Bram Street maintenance property. So whether that be parkland or whether it be community center slash part of a development similar to what they had in Williamsburg area, because I know that whole area is going to be developed, and it would really be nice if there was some community space there. So I don't know how to proceed, but
Mr. May.
Through you, Mr. Chair, I think I can respond from a hard facility perspective, but Ms. McGoldrick may want to jump in on the parkland question. All of the facilities listed on page 111 have been inserted into the budget through the Leisure Facilities Master Plan project. And that Leisure Facilities Master Plan project, which is done, I believe it's once every 4 years in advance of an update to the DC bylaw, allows council to set rec and leisure priorities across the city so that the needs of all neighborhoods are considered equally. So my suggestion is that as a part of the next Leisure Facility Master Plan, we would be looking at areas within the downtown and may come to a recommendation on the Bram Street lands. But to create something ahead of that process would be to put it outside of that larger citywide analysis.
And when is that going to be, when does that next master plan due?
Mr. Goldrick?
Sorry,
Mr. May,
Mr. Chair, it's in the next, I think it's 2022 or 2023, but I'll look for that now and I'll get back to you.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Next, we have Councillor Singh.
Yeah, just further to Councillor Johnston's, I guess her picking up on the councillor-led speed calming measures. I agree with the comments that she made. She may have backtracked a little bit in asking for that issue paper, so I encourage her to do still carry that forward. If she's now reluctant, I would do so. I think having the additional 3 spots would definitely go a long way in helping us support. I understand, I've heard this rationale that the increased spots does deviate or lessen the overall benefit, but I mean the overall demand is significant. I can at least attest in my ward, and just the availability of the delineators that we have doesn't fully meet that need. So having the extra science will definitely go a long way.
Mr. May, your hand's up, or is that just from before?
Yeah, I simply want to confirm that the next Leisure Facilities Master Plan will be completed in 2023.
2023, very good, thank you. Okay, Councillor Johnston, you want to respond?
Yes, thanks, Chair Davey. I didn't know that I should ask for it as an issue paper, because I hate to put that onto back onto staff's plate. But if that is the way that we can get more flexi delineators per ward, would be great. And I guess what I would ask for in that issue paper is a suggestion about how many more. I would love to see 3 more per ward personally, but I would leave that to staff's discretion. And thank you, Councillor Singh.
Yeah, just as a process point, Mr. Chair, I think we do have to specify what the need, what that ask is, I think, as a budget. So if you leave it to staff's hand, staff have already said that in their mind, more isn't needed, that they can restructure. I think it's the will of this council to really direct staff if we think that additional dollars are required to broaden it. So I think we have to set some direction.
All right, I will then say 3, please. I would like to say, I would like to see 3 more per ward, and ask for an issue paper on that then. Thank you. Thanks. Thanks, Councillor Singh.
Sorry, Councillor Johnston, just before we, apologies, before you let that go. So I'm just hoping like in that request as well as just general staff, because I didn't completely understand what staff's alternative was, but I'm understanding that that would be part of the issue paper as well, what they're proposing in the 1 to 2 different measures. That's okay. Okay, I'm seeing a nodding. Okay, sorry, Councillor Singh, continue.
Thank you.
Last question regarding the speed calming, this delineator sign. So some you just have the flexi pole, and the others have the speed sign. They're wider, but has a speed limit, the maximum speed. Most of our future signs will have the speed there, and can there be some savings because we're going to be changing, I guess, the speed limit signs from the 50 or identifying it to be 40 kilometers an hour. Yeah, just clarity on that.
Mr. Concrete.
Sure, through the chair. The center line flex stakes all have a warning speed indicated on them. So that's the 40 kilometers an hour. That needs to remain. We can't change or save any sort of funds based on that, because we do need to indicate a warning speed to ensure that drivers know what is appropriate. In terms of the type of sign, we always place that one at the center of the road. When we're looking at something on the side of the road, it's more of a hazard marker.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Galvey-Seelock.
Yeah, it's just a comment on page 43 of 63 or 128 of 199 with regards to the Innovation District parking garage. I just needed to, I know it's a couple years out, but I need to voice my objection to building another parking garage in the downtown. I think there's many other ways to accommodate parking, so I just note that as an objection again this year.
Thank you. So noted. I don't see any other questions at this point, so we will go up to page 59 of 63 or 179 on my. For some reason, I have 197 pages and there's 199 on the slide deck here, but it would be 179 by mine, whatever page 59 is.
I just wanted to confirm it's potentially because you downloaded the agenda package with the agenda pages included. So it may be off by 2 pages depending on which package members of council have downloaded.
I see. Okay, thank you. Sorry, I missed who queued in first. Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, I feel like I'm a few pages behind where you are, but I wanted to go to page 171. That is, what's the other number? Well, actually it's 171, 172, sorry. So 54 of 63, and we have neighborhood, new neighborhood parks. I just wanted clarification on what this actually means. And is there money designated to parks in the downtown or UGC area, or are these just in general? And could we have it divided out into UGC, where we know, the massive development is happening and there's going to be need for more new park areas? So I don't know whether we need more money there, or we want to separate out what would go in the UGC and what would go elsewhere. But I was wondering if we could get an issue paper on how we're going to manage park space in the downtown core.
Mr. Lobley.
Through you, Mr. Chair. Thank you for the question, Councillor Chapman. So I'll try and think two wrapped up in there. So the first one is around what that money is. The new neighbourhood parks is development charge funds collected money that we work with developers to implement parks in subdivision and through site plan. So where we obtain land through the course of development for new neighbourhood parks, the funds in the new neighbourhood park line are funds that we use to develop the parks in those new neighbourhoods. So these are all new neighbourhood parks on land which has come to us through the development process. We're currently doing something in the order of we're working on about 35 new parks currently through the next 5 years or so of the development forecast as new subdivisions come on stream. And the request for funding this year is because we have a slight shortfall that we're predicting in 2022 while we catch up with the development charge forecast that Mr. Hagee spoke about earlier on this morning. The second question was in regards to an issue paper for new downtown parks. That's something which is being addressed through Places and Spaces and through the Spaces strategy, which we're aiming to bring forward to Council in the first half of 2022. I'm afraid it wouldn't be possible to bring forward an issue paper in time for final budget day because we don't know what the priorities would be.
So, I mean, I understand that the Places and Spaces document that's being worked on, but if we don't allocate money right now in this budget, that means we won't have funding until the 2023 budget. So I'm just wondering if that's adequate. Could we put a placemaker for I mean, based on what it would cost to buy land or turn land into parkland, put a placeholder for this rather than waiting.
Mr. Labley.
So through you, Chair Davey, staff are at the direction of council. At this point, it would be complete guesswork. We would have no strategy in place at this time to be able to peg that one. And so my preference would be to wait until we've completed spaces, and then bring that forward at that time. I see Mr. Hagee has a hand up.
Mr. Hagee.
Sure. I was just going to mention, if it's about acquiring parkland, we have a separate reserve fund for that, the recreational land reserve that council can allocate at any time. It would be best if it happened through budget, but it could easily happen through a separate staff report. So if it's a question of acquiring, that does not need to be decided necessarily through the budget process. It could easily come back later in the year.
Okay, and if the city were to decide, if council were to decide to take, say, a parking lot and turn it into a park, is that part of the budget process, or would that also come out of the reserve fund?
Mr. Labley.
I do apologize, Chair Davey. I can't see everybody else, so I can't see if anybody else has turned their camera on. So I will allow you to direct if it's me that's best to answer. So if we were to convert a parking lot and it was a city-owned parking lot, there would be multiple costs associated to that. Insofar as there would be the loss of revenue to parking, which Mr. Cronkite and Mr. Redmond to, and that process, then there would be the cost of developing that park on that site. Neither of those are captured within this current budget forecast. And at this point, they would not fall within the new neighbourhood park budget. That would be a new budget ask, which is not reflected in the budget at this time, or it would be funded out of the Parks Sports Field General Provision pot.
Right, and this is too big to request an issue paper, hypothetically. We're pick a parking lot and how much would it cost to convert it? But that's kind of a question. Is it possible to do that?
Sorry, Councillor Chapman, I would think this is more a question of council. I would suggest that is inappropriate because the purpose of issue papers is really, it's not a ward specific time. It's not a time for every single one of us in every ward wants parks in specific locations and other amenities. So I would say that's out of order in terms of requesting an issue paper for that. Otherwise, we're going to be here all day with every member of council saying every single thing they would like to see in their wards and then debate it on final budget day. With respect, I mean, that's, and if anyone else wants to weigh in on that, I'm happy to. I just want to be very clear that the purpose of the budget is to affirm what's here as opposed to embark on necessarily new projects.
I'd be interested to hear what Mr. Reedman has to say. Thank you.
Certainly, Mr. Reedman.
Through the chair, I was just going to sort of reaffirm and sort of repeat what Mr. May had said earlier about the other master plan work. And so, you know, for us to identify new park space, it really should be identified through a master plan process, not a one-off. There's also a time delay between when a development application comes in and when occupancy happens, and that can be anywhere from 3 to 10 years. And so we are seeing increased development right now in the core. It's really important for us to have our decision making be informed through a master plan. And then acquire that park space and develop a comprehensive park space for communities. And so there's some communities on the edge of town that often don't have park space until a separate phase of work. And so this wouldn't be any different than other communities in our or other neighborhoods in our community, but it really should be informed through a master plan process.
Thank you.
Pardon me, Councillor Singh.
Yes, Mr. Chair, this would be for page, I guess, first page 157, which is for the centralized and improved in-person service at City Hall. This does change the way we address front desk inquiries from the public. I do applaud us looking to make the process more efficient, even although there are significant costs associated to this. My question was, of the 476,000 that's going to be coming from the enterprises, that would, I'm guessing, include the building division as well, correct?
Through the chair, and so we are looking at each service area that would utilize that space to provide their proportionate share of the cost. And so yes, correct. That's correct. The building division, along with parking enterprise and other service areas, would fund a component of that.
Okay, I wanted to make sure that they are paying their fair share as well, and that they're going to be as part of the front desk resource. So I'll just put pressure on staff to ensure that they're paying their definite fair share and there's no subsidization, because I think they do have capacity to pay and their reserves are quite healthy. With that, the other question is regarding the Conrad Center with the capital improvements that are needed. The 1.3 million, that's 1.35 million that's needed immediately as 2023, 2022, 2023. That's not out of capital current, is it? Or is that from the Economic Development Fund?
Mr. Haggie.
Through the chair, that funding is actually coming from the Canada Community Benefit Fund, or federal gas tax.
The federal gas tax. Okay, that's great. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Ioannidis.
Thank you, Chair Davey. I'm looking at page. Jeez, I lost it. It was in regards to the parks there, and I thought it was page 55. Let's see. Anyways, it was with regards to the parks, and I noticed on one of the parks, trails, and one was with Rolling Meadows Trails. I just wanted to know exactly what's going to be happening with that significant capital improvement there.
Through you, Chair Davey, that's the next stage of rolling out the Cycling and Trails Master Plan. So that's the next body of work we're upgrading through the Cycling and Trails Master Plan. So again, it's granular trail being converted to asphalt and adopted into winter year-round maintenance program.
Okay, that's great. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, and Mayor Verbenovich.
Yeah, thanks, Chair David. Just very briefly, apologies to everyone, but I'm going to need to step off to go on to regional budget. So I know it's in good hands with all of you to finish this off. I'll just ask that the information I requested earlier gets forwarded on as we deal with things. And Councillor Johnson, as acting mayor, will be chairing the special council at the end of finance.
Very good. Thank you. Good luck.
Thanks.
Councillor Galusielak.
Yeah, my question is more of a general question, and I bring it up in this section just because of a number of new projects that are, and not road reconstruction projects, but projects that have been added to the capital forecast. And my question is, where is that funding coming from? Or is there something that was taken out of the capital forecast in order for these new projects to be admitted into the forecast?
Good question, Mr. Haggie.
Sure, through you, Mr. Chair. Nothing has been removed from the capital forecast. The difference from the 21 10-year budget to the 22 budget is fairly significant. But as I mentioned earlier, we've got 2021 was a bit of a different year, and we had paused some things. So we had lower, we didn't have a normal 10-year capital forecast. It was adjusted somewhat. This year, we do have what would be a more typical 10-year capital forecast. So the funding sources for the changes, again, the biggest one has been enterprises. And so, for instance, we saw funding being reduced from the first year, 2021, the funding from there falling off. And then we have 2031 being added. Those costs are being inflated as we typically would. So we see cost increases just out in year 10 because we anticipate doing a similar amount of work or something similar out there would cost more, as well as, for instance, we see in the road reconstruction program that does increase by more than the rate of inflation. It goes up about 6% a year. So we do have increased costing there. So we have the funding coming from various enterprises or reserves or the capital pool, as we saw earlier in the forecast, but it's more a function of having a typical 10-year forecast as opposed to having kind of a 1 in 9 forecast like we did last year.
Okay, I guess my question then, again, it's just a generic question that I felt to bring up now, is if we were so inclined to want to decrease the capital out of current contribution, I know we would have to find where, but what implication does that have over the 10-year capital forecast if we were to decrease the capital out of current contribution towards this capital forecast?
Sure. So assuming that you mean the amount transferred from operating to capital, is that specific piece? That makes up, I believe it's only about $2 million in total of the entire, or of year one. I think in total, the dollar amount was about $33 million over the 10-year forecast. So we would have to reduce the capital program, issue more debt. Reserves would not be able to make up that amount. So there would be some tough decisions that would need to be made about reducing capital programming or increasing the debt levels of the city.
Mr. Chapman, to add?
Through the chair, but I think what you're asking, Councillor Galloway-Seelock, is also just the principle that a 1-year reduction in capital out of current in the operating budget is multiplied by 10 in the capital forecast. So any levy savings we would have in 2022 would be multiplied essentially by 10 in terms of a reduction in the capital forecast.
Okay, I think I understand. I think I remember hearing it from previous years, but just wanted to make sure because I noticed that there's a number of new projects that were put into the capital forecast this year. And I was just curious as to where all the funding was coming from. I've looked at the other budget package from the website and know where the budget sources are coming from, but I appreciate the answers to my questions. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ioannidis.
Thank you, Chair Davey. I guess my question is with regards, and I'm sorry if I was looking at this budget during my son's basketball game and all that stuff, so I may have missed it, but I don't see anywhere in here the resurfacing projects, paving, resurfacing. Like, do we not normally have a list of streets that that are being resurfaced?
Mr. Haggie.
Through the chair, I don't have the exact page number. I can assure you that the resurfacing program exists kind of at its full capacity. It's a few $1 million. The specific roads are not normally listed off here. That comes later at the tender award stage of the project.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Okay, and Councillor Singh.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So this is on page, I missed this earlier, so that's why I keep back in regarding the downtown streetscape. That's a considerable investment that the downtown is receiving once more on top of the considerable work that was done a few years back. The issue paper does outline that the costing is coming, some of it is coming from the gas tax. My question is, do we have an ability to have some of this work or future improvements come from the development community as a way of site plan, where they have to do improvements, say a development application comes forward and they would be required to do the necessary improvements in front of the development property, as opposed to just their lands alone. So the public right of way as well.
Mr. Lobley, hello, maybe a planning question as well.
Yeah, my planning colleagues may well jump in as well on this one. Indeed, they do, Councillor Singh. So we already find that developers in the downtown do contribute towards the streetscape in the front of their properties and buildings. And so this work is tailored and matched in with that.
So that's already been costed out based on the improvements that they would make, or what they would be contributing into that? And do we have a way of asking for direct, like in dollars, as opposed to them, requiring them to do whatever they would want to do in their own way, as opposed to, so there's a aligned strategy of what the streetscape would look like?
So through you, Chair Davey, this work is work which is identified over and above and beyond any work that developers would be doing. We are working on dovetailing our needs with the developers' needs when they do improvements, so that they're matched in with our improvements. And we're definitely together with the developers in the downtown on those pieces of work.
Okay, and I think this is something that can be captured hopefully by future councils as well, that we do need to place some increased consideration on the development. Not only does that improve their investment, but also there needs to be a broader community benefit of that development coming in. So it's more of a comment. Later part, Chair Davey, on page 53 of 63, so 170 in mine, on Aaron Brook to Countryside Trail, I see that we are budgeting 2023 of a trail improvement, but at the same time in 2022 there are improvements happening for the Walter Bean Trail as well as the Rolling Meadow. So because there's quite a bit of work happening along trails, could we have some synergies if we were to accelerate that program along with those other trails, so it happens all in 2022?
Mr. Lobley.
I'm looking to see
Chair
if there's
Davey.
a way of savings and at the same time of speeding up that work.
Through you, Chair Davey, no is the short answer. We don't have staff capacity to be able to support more projects. Getting projects out the door is a complex process. And whilst there might be some efficiencies of scale in terms of the contractors, we just don't have the staff capacity to be able to take on more projects. And so we already have a very full 2022.
Okay, fair enough. As much as I would love to see this happening sooner, I won't push my luck. Thank you.
Councillor Marsh.
Yeah, I just want to make a quick comment, if I may. Yeah, I agree that the downtown has had a lot of, we've spent a lot of money on the downtown streetscape over the last 10 years. But I just want to point out two things. One is when we have downtown businesses that receive, property standards notices from the city, and they say, well, we need to maintain our property standards, but so do you. It comes back on us to make sure that we are ensuring that our property standards are as good as what we're asking for or better. And then the other point I want to make is that we have we have some deficiencies that are an accessibility hazard. We cannot delay because there are tripping hazards. There are places where people with accessibility challenges cannot access very easily. And so as much as it's tough to see this high of a budget for downtown maintenance. From my perspective, it seems like, unfortunately, it's a necessary item.
Okay, that concludes questions and comments on, Councillor Ioannidis.
Yeah, I just want a clarification on Councillor Marsh's comments. Are you saying downtown is more important, infrastructure is more important than other infrastructure? Because that's what it sounds like to me.
Never. You know that's not true.
Okay. Well, there's tripping hazards everywhere. So
Right. And it's my understanding that it's not explicitly mentioned in our budget, but it's my understanding that we do work on tripping hazards that are on our sidewalks throughout the city. And we have to do that regardless. And so I'm just pointing out that we have grouped them all together in this budget. And maybe Ms. McGoldrick has more to say about that. But Councillor Ioannidis, respectfully, you're putting words into my mouth that are quite dangerous to say. You know that that's not the case.
well, no, I didn't say those words. I'm just trying to get a better understanding, because there's significant dollars being funded in the downtown, and you're fluffing it off as, oh, it needs it more than because it's standards that are whatever. Well, that's the same throughout the city, wouldn't it be? Like, I don't know. That's what I understood what you said. So I'm just a little, that's all.
No.
Okay, Ms. McGoldrick.
So through the chair, I do want to confirm that the standards are consistent across the city and any trip hazards are identified, and the associated remediation/repair are performed. The only other point I'll mention around downtown is just the aging nature of the streetscape and the assets. So when you look at the scale of which we're seeing deterioration, it makes more sense to invest in a block by block approach as opposed to a trip hazard specific approach. And so that's what you're seeing. And then coupled by other issues experienced in the downtown, specifically around trees. And so that's the request that's coming forward.
Thank you. Councillor Singh.
Yeah, thank you. So I'm guessing this is the end. So in case there's any additional items that we would want to be able to address. So
We were actually, yes. So actually we're still in the last section, but there are no more questions. So yeah, now I would ask if anyone has any questions on the remaining pages or anything that has been missed, please go ahead. And I would also ask Councillor Galloway-Seelock if you're there. Oh, thank you. If you could just take over chairing for me for like maybe 3 or 4 minutes, I'd appreciate it. Thanks.
okay, all right. So can you go ahead?
Go ahead, Councillor Singh.
Okay, thank you, Chair Galloway-Seelock. So my question, or not question, but what I would love to see as an issue paper, if it's required, would be a staff recognition program. If my colleagues in council may recall, we had this program a number of years ago. It was taken away. A coordinated strategy to recognize our staff for the great effort and the work, dedicated service that they're providing to our community. I want to make sure that we have some allocated dollars to either implement that program once more, if that's required as a budget, or if that can be done within our existing budget capacity. So that would be a question of staff. And it's more so poignant because of the struggles that we've gone through the pandemic. I think even more so, we need to show appreciation and recognition to our dedications of staff.
Ms. Rabb?
So through you, Chair Galloway-Seelock, sorry, Councillor Singh, can you, you broke up a little bit there for me. Are you talking about specifically in response to the pandemic or globally?
No, I think in general, it's just staff recognition program going onward, but I think it's brought to light, obviously, extra dedication the staff had to provide in supporting our community. I think it shows the importance of us having a in perpetuity program of staff recognition.
Right. So,
and this can be through celebration of their 10-year of service as well. That's how it used to be in the past, and I think we've kind of taken a step back from that celebration.
Yeah, so I see that Dan Chapman has his hand up. I'm having some issues with my sound, so I'll let him respond and then I can hop in if I don't have any other comments.
Okay, Mr. Chapman.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Through you, you're correct, Councillor, saying that for many years, the city had a long service recognition program where based on certain anniversary dates, employees would be recognized. I believe at one point there was a dinner and there were gifts, and then it moved to a reception. A review of that program was completed a few years back, and the program wasn't eliminated, but it was modified to focus less on long tenure and more on other reasons for recognition. What I might suggest as a next step, if it's agreeable, is we can, by email, circulate to council some of the detail from the review that was done so that you can see the consultation that happened with staff, how the program was changed, and I think more importantly, what's happening right now and what we're thinking about for 2022. Because what I hear you saying, as well as that coming out of the pandemic, it's especially important. We recognize efforts of staff. We've been thinking a lot about that and talking about it. And so if I can start there, I'll give the council that background and that update. And then if you still, Councillor Singh, want to bring something back on final budget day, at least all of council will have that information.
Okay, and whatever the background information would outline what that budget impact could be if you wanted to initiate a program?
What we can do is certainly provide the costing on the program as it was before, and so that will give you a sense for what a years of recognition program would cost if that were to be reinstituted, but also the background around the review that was completed that caused us to move away from it.
Yeah, and to be honest, just for clarity, I referenced the years of service. I understand some of the reasons why we maybe step back from that. But again, my focus would be more of a ongoing recognition. So they don't have to be leading the incorporation. It's just their extra sense of dedication to the citizens of Kitchener. So if we don't have that specific program through a policy, I think that's what we need to bring as part of 2022. That's what I'm asking for.
That's great. And I just want to say I really appreciate Councillor Singh even raising the issue. I think that's meaningful to the staff on the call. And so we'll let you know what's already underway, what's planned for 2022, and if council believes there's a gap, we welcome that conversation.
Thank you.
Okay, if there's no further comments, I believe that we are through the, Councillor Chapman?
Well, actually, mine is the next section. Are you still working on the up to page 199?
Yep, all questions.
Okay, I'll wait.
All questions now. No, go ahead.
So I can, beyond 199, the resolutions, I just wanted to ask for another issue paper if that's possible. And I'm wanting to an issue paper that would draws from page 60 of Transform Waterloo Region, where it talks about food sovereignty. And so this would include everything like community garden program, enhancing it, considering, maybe winterized greenhouses to grow vegetables through the winter on a community basis. So I was just wondering if we could get an issue paper on how we might satisfy that part of the Transform Waterloo Region document.
Mr. May, you want to respond to that?
Sure, through you, Madam Chair, and maybe some of my other colleagues want to jump in. That sounds to me like a brand new program, and I don't believe that staff would be able to develop that program and cost it out in time for final budget day.
And if we focus on community gardens as a source of food sovereignty, that's already an existing program, is it not?
Through you, Madam Chair, we recently reviewed the community garden program and increased it. I do believe we have one of the strongest community garden programs in the province. Having said that, one of the big things is staff and volunteer capacity. And so I'm not exactly sure that we would be able to bring that back in time for final budget day.
Mr. Chapman, you wanted to add something?
What I can offer, though, through to Councillor Johnston, is that even just this past week, I was having conversation with Anne-Marie Cipriani, our new corporate sustainability officer, about the approach to implementing all the recommendations that are applicable to the municipality under Transform WR. So what I think is reasonable, if it's agreeable to you, Councillor, and the rest of Council, for final budget day, we can certainly report back on the work that's being done to develop the implementation plan across the whole strategy. And so captured in that obviously is the one narrow recommendation, but I think more broadly, just what's the philosophy to move the whole body of work forward? Because as you know, there's a lot there that we need to work through. And so to me, that would be at least a good next step to keep it moving forward with Council. So I can
Sorry, that would be great. I mean, I just honed in on one, thinking that that was, you know, growing an existing program and it would be easy to do, but yeah, a report back would be great. Thank you.
Yeah, we can do that.
Okay, I turn it back over to you, Chair Davey.
Thank you kindly. Councillor Chapman's done. So again, this is the end portion. So there are no other questions. If anything has been missed, now would be the time before we actually do the resolution. Councillor Singh.
Yes, Mr. Chair, I would just want to point out some conflicts that I would have.
Oh, certainly.
Yeah, so if this can be voted separately, this is page 111, Mill and Cortland addition, as my family and I have property near that community center. Although I think this is interesting common, just to be extra careful. Page 136 on 2nd Avenue of the same nature, and page 138 for Connaught Street from 9th to Trainer of same nature as well.
Okay, sorry, just looking to the clerk for a second, but being that we're not voting on this yet, we're only voting on the resolutions. It only has to be if the resolution was in conflict with those. So
that would be good. Then I'll bring it up on budget day.
Very good. Thank you. Councillor Chapman.
Yeah, my apologies. There was one other item that I wanted to bring forward. And I should have done this last week when we were looking at the operating budget. But I was wondering if we could get an issue paper on the $63,000 request that we received from the Social Development Center, where that money would come from and the implications that that would have.
Okay, and I just looked to staff to confirm that's something they think they'd be able to accommodate in time for final budget day.
Thank you. Through the chair, yes, staff will bring an issue paper forward on that as per council's request.
Thank you.
Okay, very good. And actually, Councillor Chapman, this was probably the best time if you were going to bring that forward would be now, because we didn't hear from the delegation prior to operating. So that lag time makes some sense. Okay, I'm not seeing anyone else in the queue, so I would look to Mr. Haggie to summarize that. It seems like there's quite a number of issue papers coming out of this one, but if you could bring that up on the screen.
Sure, absolutely. This is what we've recorded. Again, if we need to edit or add, I'm not entirely certain we captured everything in the affordable housing discussion. But people can review and let me know if there's something else to tweak or add.
Very good. Okay, so I would encourage members of the committee, if this is what staff will be going off of in terms of their response. So if there's anything that's not clear here, then now's the time to add that clarity. Councillor Galway-Seelock.
Yeah, I just reread it again, and I think it's captured, but under the affordable housing and other capital options, that's where we'll get information on the debt issue, if we want to issue debt for the capital infrastructure and the trails. Is that what the or other capital options means?
Yes, and because of the discussion, I don't think that we can't necessarily issue debt for affordable housing, but that's, yeah, the second bullet here, where debt is an option. What would that be?
Okay, just wanted to make sure that was captured. Thank you.
Councillor Singh.
Yeah, just to ensure that there's enough clarity for some in that issue paper for the affordable housing. Some of the key things that were raised from both myself and Mayor Van Eyck's question or ask of additional 1 or 2 million would be partnership with Kitchener Housing. So if the issue paper can specifically outline if that's it's an available option, in which case we may not be necessarily leveraging debt ourselves. We may have an opportunity to provide, the necessary down payment to procure property, but it's debt that's taken out by Kitchener Housing. So that's a strategy. Again, it's high level, but that's something that staff can look through the issue paper of varying options. And the other one, was, what was it?
Well,
I'm
Councillor
blacking,
Singh,
yes, I'm blacking out.
I
But
wondered
I'll
about
come back
the,
to it.
I wondered about the next one. Is that correct? I think I captured.
So
one
yes,
about-
the other one isn't necessarily incentivizing through dollars, but it's through like planning policy. How can we create more options to accelerate the development of purpose-built rentals? If that comes back to me, the other thing that I'm missing, Chair Davey, I hope you'll excuse if I key back in.
There is no one else in the queue to speak, Councillor. Pardon me, Councillor Singh. So we'll just give me the thumbs up and you're good to go.
I had a sick little one all night, so I'm going on 3 hours of sleep. So I'm completely blacking out. I had something that tip of my tongue I wanted to bring up as a part of the affordable housing, but I think budget day may be an opportunity. It's okay. Or, I'll send an email to council and staff later.
Okay, very good. So I would need a mover for these issue papers to be referred to staff. Moved by Councillor Schneider. Any comments or questions or discussion? Councillor Marsh.
Yeah, I just want to provide a tiny bit of clarification about the email request about reserve funds. I think that when we're looking to staff to indicate where we might be able to find additional monies, I know debt was one of the options that we are asking about. But I think just to clarify what I'm thinking, what I'd like to understand better is if we have some reserve funds that are healthy enough to add to the funding pool that we're looking to achieve with the three options that are before us with the capital options. So I'm just trying to make sure that staff are clear on that looking for potential for reserve funds to be the source of that funding.
I think that's clear, Mr. Haggie. Yes.
Yeah, sorry, I gave a thumbs up, but I might not be on your screen.
No, that's okay. No, that's good. Okay, and Councillor Singh, came back to you.
I did remember it's corresponding information regarding debt, as in current interest rates. So that's additional information, but depending on how much detail that staff want to provide, I don't know if that needs to be as a direction, outlining
Yeah, I think that's
interest, current and forecast.
Oh yeah, yes. I think that was captured under.
Yeah, I have it as the third. Also,
Yeah,
what have the
yeah,
past,
yeah.
present, future debt interest rates been?
Right, so that's there, but if staff will give an opinion as to using the strategy of debt for our strategic initiatives.
Sure.
So I think a staff opinion associated just to information may be helpful.
Okay.
And the last bit that I was forgetting, Chair Davey, was regarding the school board, the DC funding exemption that, if we choose to go that direction, the city obviously would be exempting in the school and the region, but asking the school board if they're going to be a participating partner. Having that information as part of budget would greatly help.
So question of staff, offhand on that one, actually. The school, I don't think the school board has the autonomy to make that decision. Does the province not have a say in that, or do we not know?
Through the chair, I'm not confident in this answer, so my guess would be that you are correct, that individual school boards would not have the power to be able to waive DCs. I think that would more likely be a Ministry of Education choice that would have to be made.
Yeah, so we'll leave it here, Councillor Singh, but this may end up being an advocacy piece instead of.
No, I agree. If that's not the direction, then we definitely need to advocate for the province and expect a future motion then.
Exactly. Okay. So sorry, these have been moved by Councillor Schneider. Those in favor? And any opposed? None opposed. Very good. So thanks everyone. That concludes Finance and Corporate Services. We now go into Special Counsel with Acting Mayor Birthday Woman Johnson.
I'm okay being called birthday girl, so thank you.
Good. You never know, right? Anyway.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Chair Davey. Due to COVID-19 restrictions, City Hall is not open for very limited services, it's not open except for very limited services by appointment only. Members of public are invited to participate in meetings electronically by accessing the meeting live stream video at kitchener.ca/watchnow. While in-person delegations are not feasible at this time, members of the public are invited to participate electronically in future meetings by contacting delegation@kitchener.ca. Today, we gather on the traditional territory of the Neutral, Anishinaabe, and Haudenosaunee peoples. We recognize our responsibility to serve as stewards for the land and honor the original caretakers who came before us. Our community is enriched by the enduring knowledge and deep-rooted traditions of the diverse First Nations, Métis, and Inuit in Kitchener today. We'll move on to capital budget direction. That staff be directed to report and/or take appropriate action on the following matters arising from the November 29, 2021 Special Finance and Corporate Services Committee meeting relative to the 2022 capital budget as outlined in the chart display. I don't know if someone's going to put up that chart or. Mr. Hagee, do we just refer to the previous chart? Oh, sorry.
Yeah. Sorry, it would be the resolution that was passed by committee. I can put that back up on screen if required.
I don't know if we're required. I'm sorry, I'm going from one screen here today, so I got to keep flipping back and forth. So my apologies. Thanks. Okay. All right. Okay, we'll now move into the in-camera meeting authorization. Then an in-camera meeting City Council be held immediately following this.
Sorry, point of order.
I'm sorry, yes.
Acting Mayor. Yeah, sir, we do have to vote on that. So typically the chair would move it and Vice Chair Councillor Galloway-Seelock would be the seconder, and then we'd have to vote on that. Then we can use Special Counsel.
Thank you, Councillor Davey. That is not in my notes here, so I appreciate that. I will, I'll please, Councillor Davey, go ahead and move it.
Yeah, just I forget the number of items that were requested in terms of issue papers be approved.
Thank you. Do we have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Singh, and all those in favor? And thank you. That passes.
I think it was moved by Councillor Galloway-Seelock. I was just raising my hand in support. So a second is sorry. It was the chair and the vice chair.
Okay, thank you so much, Councillor Singh. Okay, so that looks like it passed unanimously, including me. Thank you. Okay, we'll now move into in-camera then. Then in-camera meeting of City Council be held immediately following the Special Council meeting this date to consider a matter of security of property and labor relations as authorized by sections 239(2) A and D of the Municipal Act 2001 respectively, excuse me. Do I have a mover to go into? Thank you, Councillor Michaud, and Councillor Ioannidis has seconded that, and all those in favor? Thank you. And I will ask Ms. Saunderson, do we stay here or are we going to move to another call?
Through the chair, if you wouldn't mind just calling for mover and seconder related to the bylaws, and then we will stop live streaming and move into closed session on the same link.
Thank you. Okay. Okay. I will ask for a mover and seconder of the bylaws, please. So a mover. Thank you, Councillor Ioannidis. Thank you for seconding, Councillor Galloway Seelock. All those in favor? Okay, thank you. That passes. And now we can move into in camera.